evening, everyone. Today is March 20th, 2024. It is 7 p.m. This is a joint meeting between the Board of Selectmen, Finance Committee, and School Committee. Is there a motion to call the Selectmen's meeting to order?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
I could call a motion, please, to open tonight's joint meeting, School Committee, Finance Committee, and Select Board. So moved. Second. Okay, we'll take a roll call vote. Jen Downing is present. Mrs. Gomes?
Yes.
Mr. Howcroft?
Yes.
Mr. Hood?
Yes.
And Mrs. Cadera?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. This is a meeting of the Finance Committee with the School Committee and Board of Selectmen. Do I have a motion to open our meeting?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
We'll do a roll call as well. Sue Delgado,
Yes.
Pete Benoit,
Yes.
Eric Chu,
Yes.
Robert Ferrero,
Yes.
Kristen Flynn,
Yes.
Eric McGlynn,
Yes.
Robert St. Jean.
Yes.
This meeting is being video and audio recorded for future cable broadcasts. Please silence all cell phones for the duration of the meeting. Is there a motion to open tonight's joint meeting, including the School Committee and Finance Committee?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
I will now recognize the Chairman of the Finance Committee, Mike Boucher, as the Chairman of the joint meeting.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending tonight. And before we get into the school's budget, I'd like to have our town administrator, Mr. Jamie Kelly, just give us an overview of where the town is at right now financially.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, in the past, the way that the budget is put together is we look at the revenue figures, make estimates for the next fiscal year, and these estimates are based on the tax levy, the state aid, and the estimated local receipts. This year, the state aid estimate is $8,692,399. The tax levy is $22,353,618.90. And the estimate for the local receipts is $3,923,191. There are also additional revenue available for appropriation that is $575,488. The total estimate for the general fund operation revenue is $35,378,696. That is $778,360.21 above the previous year. In a discussion of past years, it's very obvious when you look at it going from fiscal year 21 to 22. For tax levy, there was a 7.16% increase from going from 22 to 23, a 4.82 increase from 23 to 24, a 3.01 increase, and from 24 to 25, the estimate is 3.08. Other than one outlying year, it's been fairly consistent. Your state aid from 21 to 22 is increased 0.5%. From 22 to 23, 1.27%. From 23 to 24, 8.48%. And from 24, the estimate to 25 is 0.18%. Local receipts. From 21 to 22 is 10.59%. From 22 to 23 is 2.67%. From 23 to 24 is 3.89%. And from 24 to 25 is 2.41%. With $778,360.21 available in revenue for fiscal year 25. The expense estimate right now is $2,077,542,000. The budget is in deficit, $1,299,181.79. That includes increases in assessments. That's Old Colony Vocational Technical and Bristol County Retirement of $623,614. Those are assessments that are taken off the top. Town expenses then are $1,453,928 above last year. So it is a serious deficit. Their revenue has been restricted because state aid for education has been not funded at the normal rate, but it's been increased by only 0.5%. So the budget is in deficit, and you have to present a balanced budget to town meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. I know we're going out of order here, but before the school presents their budget, could we all rise to say pledge of allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
I
Chairman.
have a question, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Are we going up, in your planning, are we going up to the full 2.5 levy?
Kevin, do you want to take that one?
There's, what, 120 on the table?
There is, the unused levy capacity is 120,000.
Does that equal 2.5% of the previous town budget?
No, 120,000? No.
So you're not going up to the full 2.5 levy this year?
Well, the 2.5 levy, we are, as far as the fiscal year adjustment to the previous tax levy. So you're increasing from 524,260, which was the 2.5 adjustment in the previous year, which gave you a legal levy limit of 21,697,450. And then your 2.5 for this year is 542,436.25. So yes, you're increasing the 2.5.
You're going to the max of the 2.5? That's the question I have.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
The problem you have is your fiscal year new growth has decreased substantially from the previous year and from the year prior to that. And so when you reach the legal levy limit, you are, and then you take the debt exclusion and the unused levy capacity, you're at $22,696,371.25.
The new growth figure, that is what the assessors have notified that they're going to release?
No, that's what the assessors have told us is their estimate. They do not release.
Oh, okay, they estimate that. Is it the full amount, or are they releasing only a percentage
No,
of?
the estimate is always the full amount. I
Okay.
think you're confusing it with the overlay.
Okay.
Mr. Howcroft, did that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah, speaking on new growth, that's obviously been affected throughout the state because of what's happened nationally in the last 3.5 years. Horrible economy, high inflation, which in turn raises interest rates. So that's really, who's gonna wanna do any new construction or renovations when you're faced with that? So it's really restricted our town to generate revenue. It's really been a hindrance, and
So, excuse me, if we had a drop off in building permits, is that it really, that's the main?
Yes, we have. Yep.
Patrick, do you wanna get into your budget?
I will,
Or
thank
Paula?
you. Thank you for being here tonight. We're going to have a presentation, and I would just ask that you hold your questions to the end, okay? So since we presented this budget originally in February, we've really all sharpened our pencils, and we reduced it significantly. We've met with the Finance Committee Chair and Vice Chair, with the Board of Selectmen Chair, of course, many, many meetings with our Budget Subcommittee to get to this point. In April, we will have our budget public hearing. In May, the school committee will vote to adopt the budget in alignment with the June 3rd town meeting. So we're doing this strategically so that we can leave the budget open as long as we can in order to get clarity on the state's aid numbers and also leave room for any other adjustments that may arise, whether it's the town or the school. So everything that we do with our budget goes back to our mission and our vision. Our mission with the Acushnet Public Schools is in partnership with staff, parents, and community is to promote student success, growth, and learning in a safe and supportive environment. And our vision is to be a high-performing school district where all students are afforded the opportunities to realize their potential. So this is also in line with our district strategic plan. In our district strategic plan, we have 3 pillars that we focus on. The first one is achieving academic excellence for all students. And we do this by having a complete staffing pattern, which includes teachers, paras, coaches, interventionists, librarians, specialists. Every single person who works for the school system contributes to achieving academic excellence for all of our students. And we know what we are doing is working, as the scores in the middle and the elementary school have continued to rise. And our Acushnet Elementary School was recently recognized at the national level as one of 55 schools in the country as a national distinguished school. Our next pillar, creating thriving social and emotional learning experiences. An example of this would be the enrichment after-school program at the elementary school and middle school sports and clubs. And those are things that our children really love, and they come to school for it every day. It's what they come to school for oftentimes. The third and last pillar is strengthening partnerships with parents and the larger community. So we send out parent and student surveys to encourage a sense of belonging for all students. Another example for this pillar would be field trips, maintaining our facilities so that a lot of our youth organizations in the community can access our facilities. So these 3 pillars sometimes work together and overlap, but we've had a strong focus on them now for a few years.
So now I'm going to try to explain Chapter 70 and get in the weeds a little bit to share sort of the overarching picture of our budget, and I think I'll allude to some of the same sentiments that Mr. Kelly, has made in regards to the town finances. But essentially, the state establishes our budget with a foundation budget, and the foundation budget is essentially what the cost of doing business is. What's the cost to educate a student in our community? So the state establishes the foundation budget based on numerous categories that you can see on the slides. I apologize for the size, but this is how it fit in. So there's columns of administrative costs down to operations and maintenance, and then that's based on enrollment from preschool all the way up through high school. So generally these rates year over year are impacted by inflation. So that's the base rates on the left-hand side. As we know, inflation's been an impact in the economy as of late. Over the past 2 years, FY23 and FY24, the inflation rate has increased significantly, but the Chapter 70 formula caps that rate at 4.5%. So that means no matter how high inflation rises in the economy, the state's going to say, we'll give you up to 4.5% as a factor in your foundation, and we're going to leave it at that. Some of the fall off in Chapter 78 was in FY25. They seem to think that inflation has stabilized, and that inflation factor has come down to 1.35%, so versus 4.5% last year. I don't want to get into this topic too much, but there's rumors of an inflation fix where aid could increase because, again, the cap of 4.5% last year, they identified the real inflation factor was 6.1%. And they're saying, hey, we realize there's towns in a deficit still, so if we can make up that difference that we capped you off of last year and add it to this minimal 1.3 this year, potentially there's more funding opportunity in Chapter 70 to go out to the communities. It's very preliminary right now, and I think when we come full circle, we'll realize we don't want to bank on Chapter 78 to fund our budgets here. The other component of the foundation budget in Chapter 78 is the additional increments. So the state identifies increments for English language learners and low-income students, and they also multiply it by an inflation factor and a Student Opportunity Act factor. So we talk about Student Opportunity Act a lot. FY25 is stage 4 out of 6 of the Student Opportunity Act, and this is really where we see it pay dividends to the English language learners and the low-income students. Unfortunately for us, from 24 to 25, our English language learners decreased from 6 down to 1, so we were negatively impacted by that. And our low-income students decreased from 384 identified students to 336. So a significant decrease there, which again, all factor into our aid and our increments.
And I'd like to just add that our SOA, the Student Opportunity Act, has to be rewritten every 3 years. And it was just recently adopted by the school committee with the initiatives to address closing the gaps by developing a comprehensive approach to early literacy, administer early literacy screening and support, and this is all at the elementary school, and then targeted academic support at both schools.
So ultimately, this all comes together for the state to identify that Acushnet's foundation budget should be $15,606,989. So that's our basis. That's the cost of doing business for our students in the town of Acushnet. So that's not all, right? So here are the rates I just alluded to. So you can see you get different rates for preschool students down to low-income students. The rates all increased 3 to 5% year over year. And the columns on the right, I want you to remember 53.86% and 46.14%. That's the town and state share essentially of these rates. And we'll get into that more, but we wear the burden, I guess, if you will, on the foundation budget. So continuing further, so this is the most complicated part of town and school finance, and this is the determination of city and town total required contribution. So again, what the state does here, right, is they take, an equalized valuation, which is the total cash fair value, let me read it verbatim, full and fair cash value of all taxable property in the municipality, They get a figure, sometimes it's based on the prior year, sometimes it's based on 2 prior years, and then they multiply that by a uniform percentage factor, which essentially weighs it comparable to income taxes. They want them to have the same weight in this formula. So equalized valuation is one factor, and then income taxes is one factor, which they take straight from the Department of Revenue, income taxes by locality. They put these two numbers together and they go, hey, listen, you know, of that 15.6 million that we told you need to afford, the town should actually be able to afford about $12.5 million of that. And again, they factor this into everything. There's some more factors, I'm going to skip along, but ultimately they say, hey, we expect you to contribute 12.5 million. You know, we're going to do some things here and there to make sure that we give you some aid instead of none. And ultimately, we've determined that there is a shortfall in your town, and you're not going to be able to contribute the 12, but you're going to have to contribute 11.2 million. And I promise you, this all comes together. So trends that we've seen over the years. So I went as far back as FY21. You know, we can go back further and further, but big picture, right? Equalized valuation continues to increase. So property value continues to increase. Income taxes continue to increase because salaries continue to increase. Our enrollment, which we control, fluctuates. Well, you know, it's variable. We don't control it. It depends on how many students we report as our October 1 numbers. And all of these things factor, again, towards this target contribution. So if you look year over year, and I'm having trouble seeing on that screen too, so I'm going to look down at my notes here. The target contribution has increased, again, significantly over just these 5 years that I'm showing. So 56% back in FY21 they expected us to contribute, and now we're up to 63%. Some communities, and they cap you at it, but some communities contribute 85%, and every year they want to move the needle closer and closer to the 85% that the town contributes. So this isn't going away. Other factors are municipal revenue growth factors, which come from, you know, the town and state reports. And then you continue down, again, end of the day, year after year, we tend to have a shortfall in Acushnet, and they provide a little bit of supplemental income, or supplemental funding, excuse me, and then get us to a base that isn't our target, but it's a little closer to our target year after year. The state holds you harmless to aid, so they're always going to give you as much as they gave you last year, but they're always not going to give you the biggest piece of the pie either. So all these factors come together and they say, hey, we got to move the needle at some point. We got to get you from where you are closer to target, and that equals minimum aid, which is where we're sitting at this year, $30 per student. So again, required contribution, $11.2 million. So next slide is our apportionment of that $11.2 million across all the school districts that we're, you know, on the hook for. So that's Acushnet, Old Colony, and Bristol County Agricultural. So you can see down here, required contribution comes across, totals the 11.2. The town's required to contribute $8.9 million to the town, or the school department of Acushnet, $2.1 million to Old Colony, and $224,000 to Bristol Aggie. And it's understood that vocational agricultural schools, you know, are more expensive to educate their students because of the components. But just to paint the picture of what that alludes to, if you take the foundation budget right here, which we just went over, and divide it by your enrollment, Acushnet Public Schools is essentially getting $13,300 per student. Old Colony is getting $19,700 per student, and Bristol Aggie is getting $20,800 per student. So Acushnet Public Schools, again, I'm not admitting that this is the most perfect comparison being a vocational and an agricultural school, but per student basis with this formula, we're getting $6,400 less per student as it is, right off the bat. So in summary, you know, we talked about the 11.2. We talked about the minimum aid per student, so we're getting $30 per student because they want to close that gap. They want to get us closer to target. And what that comes down to is the town's required to contribute $8.8 million. The state's going to give us $7.2 million in aid. And both of that combined equals our required net school spending. So not only do they say, hey, foundation, you should spend at least this, but now they're saying, by the way, we're going to require you to spend more than that as well. Which again is net school spending, and that's based on the education reform. But big picture, again, is they're going to continue to close the gap, and we can't continue to rely on Chapter 70 funding, but they're also going to continue to hold us to a higher standard of expenses for our budget to meet net school spending and increase required district contribution. So where does that all come together? Net school spending trends since 2021. State average, 126%, meaning on average, schools in the states that spend 26% more than they're required to on their school budgets. Acushnet in 2021 was about 10% higher. You can notice of all these comparisons, we're lower on the chart. And by the way, these comparisons are based on local districts in our region, and then DART schools. So DART schools are determined by the state, and they're the most similar to ours in terms of grade span, enrollment, special populations, and more. So these schools weren't just pulled out of a hat. It's who's around us, and it's who's comparable to us as determined by the state. So again, I just want you to remember these percentages. 10% over net school spending. FY22, we were 12% over net school spending, while the state average was 27% over net school spending. FY23, we're getting a little leaner, 8% over net school spending, while the state's still up 26% over net school spending. And then FY24, the current year, the leanest we've been, 6% over net school spending, while the state remains 25% over net school spending. Right now, this budget that we're presenting, we're forecasting about 6% to 7% over net school spending. The factors of net school spending are not straightforward. Transportation costs do not count towards net school spending. Grant expenses don't count toward net school spending. Capital, debt interest, none of those things count towards net school spending. What it does capture isn't just our budget, but it's the town's apportionment of employee benefits, insurance, allocations of accountant fees, accounting salaries. We add all that together. So this is big picture. This isn't just our budget. This 16.9 represents all of the town's costs regarding the schools, plus our operating budget, less what I just discussed, transportation, operating, so on and so forth. And again, we're very lean, and we remain very lean in comparison to all of these schools.
So our budget is not exorbitant at all. It's $16,693,984, which is $635,901 increase, or a 3.96% increase, which we will get more into in the next couple of slides. So what does that consist of? The first is salaries and...
I got a question, Patrick. So you put the slides up there, you put the comparative schools, the DOT schools that are above net school spending. How many municipalities are at net school spending?
I can get you the actual figure to that, not right now, but I can get back to you. But in my previous presentations, we're in the bottom 1/4% of the state in net school spending compared to anybody else.
But I'm just looking at some of those, like Lincoln, Concord.
Understood. Yep. No,
I
but
don't know
again,
what the criteria of the state, but I
it
think
expands before that.
Those are pretty wealthy communities.
It expands beyond that.
But they
And like I
also...
said, the 318 districts in the school, I think we were 217. That's off the top of my head. So we're in that bottom.
Yeah, I get
quartile.
that. It would be good to get that because just for my own edification and then look at performance metrics.
So
versus
one thing I do
that.
want to clarify though is the factors of net school spending is everything that we just went over, right? So they're factoring in the equalized valuation of property in these towns. They're factoring in the income, and they're holding these towns to a higher standard of foundation budget. So it's apples to apples when all's said and done. So it doesn't matter if it's a more wealthy community than
Don't
not.
interpret that my question as being biased in any way. It's
No,
just more
I'm just expanding on
to
it.
get a full picture.
Yep, we can get you
So I'm
that.
not making any snap judgments.
No, but that's why we put the dark communities in, as well as the communities in the region.
Are those the only dark?
Those are all
dark.
the
Yeah,
dark
those are the
communities.
dark
Those are the only
communities.
ones. Yep.
Paul, I know you said you wanted to hold questions, but this relates to real estate. You want me to
hold it, or you want me, or can I
It's
ask?
up to you. If you'd like to ask a question,
No,
that's
it's
fine.
just to your point about, you know, the different communities and their assessed values. I guess, how does that come into it? Because I look at Lincoln Concord, you know, if Wellesley was out there, you're talking about an average $3 million home, you're paying about $75,000 in real estate taxes, which is not what we pay. So how does that differential impact that calculation?
Yeah, so again, I can't get into the weeds on that, and,
Okay.
you know, odds are, you know, maybe Jamie knows more about that with the equalized valuation, but that is the whole idea of, you know, this formula right here. They find their equalized valuation and find a local effort from property wealth, and then they find an equalized valuation from the income that people
Yeah.
earn in those
I
towns.
think that would be important for us to figure out, because, I mean, I know what I've seen from my clients, and you are talking about $75,000 real estate tax bills annually.
But Wellesley wasn't on there, right?
No, but even Lincoln and Concord. I mean, I can pull up a client's house in Concord that was, you know, sold for $3 million. I know she paid about $65,000 in real estate taxes. I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out, how that is going to equate to us if we're comparing homes and their equalized value and all that other stuff. $75,000 for a $3 million home is going to give me a lot bigger pie to pull from.
Well, so like I said, my understanding is the formula captures that through those avenues, and
Yeah.
then they set the bar of your foundation budget accordingly.
Yeah.
You know, now, okay, you're a more wealthy community, we expect your contribution to be a little bit higher than the other schools. Hence why we see the Lawrences and Lowells and New Bedfords reap the benefits of the Chapter 70 aid this year, well above minimum aid. And, you know, these other communities, which I will get the report and circulate it, you'll see are at that 85% target and are getting minimum aid. So they're contributing 85% of their foundation budget locally, and the state's only contributing 15% otherwise.
And Patrick, just a comment, because it's pertinent to what we're discussing. Percentages are great, but when you're looking at a town like ours, it's not just the percentage, it's what the disposable income is left, especially after the way the economy has been the past couple of years, that the town can actually eat.
And I understand, again, I didn't create that formula, and I'm
I
talking
know, but I'm just trying to
percentages.
say, it's not just a percentage, because you have to look at what the townspeople have available.
So if you-
Somebody with a $3 million house has a lot more disposable income than
Yep.
somebody with a $200,000 house.
And that's why, you know, so this does allude to amounts. So when we say 6% over net school spending, that's $1 million. You know, 2% over net school spending is $500,000 for Fairhaven. Not over net school spending, or 0.6% over net school spending, is $1.5 million over New Bedford. So there is more than percentages here. It's a lot to digest, and I don't want to get away from the picture, but the whole point is our budget's lean as what's required by the state, and they actually expect the town over time to continue to contribute more and pull back on Chapter 70.
So Patrick, can you just discuss if we don't meet net school spending over time, what will happen?
Yeah, so ultimately net school spending, if we don't meet it, again, we're 6% over it right now. There's best practices, we talk about, you know, free cash, and you want to kind of land 3% of the budget, things like that. There's best practices of how much you want to be above net school spending. But if you don't meet net school spending, the state requires you to make up that deficit in the next fiscal year. They're not going to give you more aid, they're not going to make you return money, but you're going to have to roll those funds over to the next year and build it into your budget and make sure you spend more, which obviously could create a cliff for us too. So now we're going to build more into our budget the following year with Chapter 70 funds from the previous year that the year after that aren't going to come to fruition because we're still making up for a previous year deficit. If you continue down that path, you know, they talk about pulling back aid and penalties. I've never approached that in my career, so I don't know what that looks like further than that. Mr. Kelly?
If there is a disconnect between that effort by DESE, I assume, and the law of what we can raise under 2.5, and we get to a limit that we can't go beyond on taxation, but DESE keeps raising their mandate, what happens?
again, I'm just gonna go back to the fact that if equalized valuation and income is going up, they're gonna expect certain amounts of revenues to come back from real estate taxes, income taxes, and then they factor in your municipal growth factor, which if it's decreasing, obviously they're not gonna hold us accountable for more when they multiply that in. That's gonna help aid the community. If that's increasing along with those other two figures, of course the formula is gonna say we expect the town to contribute more.
But what if there's a conflict between the 2.5 law and
It's not
Jesse?
my expertise, and we can discuss it, but, I'm not on the town finance side.
I think we're getting off track from what's happening right now, right? We're talking about minimum net school spending and that 6% that we're over minimum net school spending. I don't think there's anybody in this room realistically that would say, hey, let's go back to net school spending. So I just think we're spinning our wheels. We could all investigate net school spending and how the equalized valuations work. We're 6% above net school spending. That besides the point, we're in a low bracket on above net school spending, right, compared to most other municipalities. We're just talking about where we're at this current fiscal year, where we're at with a budget for this current fiscal year. Even if we came in at 0, we're still 6% above net school spending.
Correct.
So net school spending it's an arbitrary, right now we don't need to have that conversation.
So why don't I go on?
I think it's good to point it out.
It's important, and I guess to that point, it was 12% over net school spending a few years ago. We've dialed that back to 6%. So again, what we're trying to say is we're doing our job, we're keeping our budget down to cost, and we're teetering the line of net school spending. which
Points
is
made.
required.
But that 6% translates to roughly $1 million.
Correct.
Okay, so our budget consists of salaries and wages. Right now, our school district has approximately 145 full-time employees. Many of our employees belong to a union, and those who do not are typically in contracts employed under 1 to 6 year contracts. So all of those agreements dictate an individual employee's annual pay and benefits. The next section is technology. Our district is a 1-to-1 district, meaning that we have a ratio of 1 device for every student. This allows equitable learning for all students and also permits immersive learning, gamification, better engagement, blended learning environments, and the ability for long-distance learning if needed. With this comes fixed costs, maintaining a strong and safe technological infrastructure that can support our devices of what our teachers and our students need. Curriculum. This is the meat and potatoes of what we do each and every day. It's the central guide for our educators as to what is essential for teaching and learning so that every student has access to a rigorous academic experience. So without core curriculum, teaching techniques would be disjointed and inconsistent from one classroom to another. And we've been down that road before. We're in a much better place now. So in order to substantially save, funding the curriculum is generally entered into as a 3 to 5 year contract, fixing its cost over that said period of time to save us money. So special education, out of all of the bunch, that is the most volatile, unpredictable, and obviously it's mandated cost to our district. On a per pupil basis, special education costs are at a minimum approximately double of that of a general education day student. To provide equitable services to all students, our district must have funding for fixed and mandated costs which support early identification, assessment, related and social and emotional services, just to name a few. And then finally, in order to be eligible for supplemental special education funding, Acushnet Public Schools must budget and spend at least the same amount of funds as the prior year, which is known as maintenance of effort. Transportation. Massachusetts schools are legally mandated to provide transportation to students who reside more than 2 miles from the school. Our school committee policy adjusts this threshold to require our students who reside more than 1 mile from school to be transported. The cost of transportation to the district is approximately $1.3 million, both for general education and special education students, and it increases regularly due to contractual obligations. And just as a point of information, we had a 13% increase under the new contract for the FY25 school year. High school tuitions. Because Acushnet Public Schools does not consist of a high school for our students, we are again legally mandated to pay tuition for resident students attending high school. Traditionally, this expense is covered in the municipal budget. However, in our town, we have the added challenge of carrying this expense in our school operating budget. So our high school tuitions costs make up approximately 20% of our overall budget. And those are some of the most unpredictable costs. So we currently pay tuitions from our local budget to Bristol Aggie, Fairhaven High School, and New Bedford High School. And then facilities or operations and maintenance. The district's parcel of land is approximately 54 acres, where building, parking, and recreational space cover the majority, all of which require quite a bit of attention. Maintaining and operating our facilities is costly, as our schools were constructed more than 50 years ago, and much of our major equipment is out of date and inefficient. While we work hard to mitigate those costs, the costs that we are able to, many costs related to operations and maintenance are fixed and become significant budget drivers. So, yes,
Before we flip the page,
yeah,
transportation, do we get reimbursed from the state?
we do not. So vocational schools get reimbursed, our school system does not get reimbursed.
Thank you.
There's minor reimbursements, special ed.
Special ed.
You can get reimbursed via circuit breaker.
Sure.
It's not at the rate that other
But it's not
vocational
that
schools would get.
79.5%,
No,
right?
and
Yeah,
then
no.
McKinney-Vento, AKA homeless transportation, we can get reimbursed for as
Thank you.
well, but that's very minimal.
Thank
Do
you.
you survey the families to determine how many students are within that 1 mile radius and the 2 mile radius? Like, is that policy, is that static? Has that been, when was that passed, and is that?
It isn't static. We actually just discussed it recently when we overhauled our transportation policy. We do evaluate those numbers, and we've considered, if we made those cuts, would that be a bus? Or, if we change that policy, would that be a bus? If we charge these students, would it be, impactful to our bottom line? And ultimately, right now, it's minimal. It's still in discussion.
I mean, I'm just curious, like the ridership, right? Like, I used to do the drop off and pick up. It's always the most popular time of the day. There's cars rolled out there. I'm just curious as to how many people are using the buses these days.
We look
Yeah.
at it multiple times a year.
And the other piece of it is, right, people register because their intentions are, they want to have it
That's a good
available,
question.
and then
It's a good question.
we find out that they're not riding the bus half the school year and they took up a seat.
I guess where I'm going with these questions is, we're doing on the town hall side of things is really doing a deep dive in scrubbing our existing business models, right? This year, more than ever, our mindset is not to look at things, not how they've always been done, and this year after year, it just becomes the same old thing. And if you're telling me that every year you examine that, and you look at it as if you were day traders, right? Then I think that's a good process to go.
We're constantly.
And we've done that. There's a bus that we cut that we weren't mandated by law to provide to one of our schools. And it's an unpopular opinion, but again, we're in tough budget times, and it's something we want to offer, but we don't require it. Other towns are accommodated by this school, so we had to pass the buck. So again, we are looking outside the box.
Okay. So again, our budget is lean, not exorbitant. So as you can see from this slide, salaries make up 62% of the overall budget and a 3.55% of the overall increase. If you remove tuitions, then the salaries are 78% of the overall budget. We do not have a contractual obligation in line where we back into personnel salaries or raises later. So what you see in the budget is what we're actually paying out. If there was an employee who needed to be replaced and they come off the books at, say, $60,000 and we hire someone at $80,000, we make up that difference in our budget. At least we have since I've been here. We don't go back to the town to ask for those funds. We also do not charge any food service salaries in our local budget. These are all charged to the school lunch revolving, which is 100% self-sustaining. Transportation, that is 8.26% of the overall budget and 1.19% of the overall increase. There's a mechanism for us to be reimbursed for some of our special ed and homeless transportation through circuit breaker, as we just discussed a little bit ago. Also, in your detailed budget, you can see that circuit breaker funds are already factored in to offset our overall budget. So $334,709 in FY25 of circuit breaker is offsetting our local budget.
And that's common practice in the state of Massachusetts.
Right. Tuition, that's almost 20%, 19.98% of the overall budget. We've had a decrease in enrollment. There's been no change to the New Bedford High School for general ed or special education. Fairhaven High School is down 18 general ed students and up 1 special education student. So historically, our budget has carried extra seats for tuition and enrollment unknowns. So since we began this process in January and February, our forecasts have already changed 7 or 8 times. But you'll see in this budget, we did not buffer for any additional seats because we know funds are scarce and are likely more valuable being available to the town at this point. However, if there is a move-in or a change, we will need to come up with a solution with you, with the town, as these can be truly budget busters. So overall, these fixed costs, which are highlighted in blue, are 90.34% of the budget, which is a result in an overall 4.24% increase. And again, that's fixed costs. And so please note, our overall increase is only 3.96% in comparison. All other items represent a 9.66% of the budget and result in a 0.28% decrease included in here, and many more mandated costs, such as special education. So here are teacher salary projections for this year coming up. So as we just stated, 62% of our budget is salaries. So to put this in perspective, above is a summary of our union teacher salaries, which are all the Unit A members. So this chart does not show every single step and level, but it shows the current categories where teachers fall. 44 of 94, which is 47% of teacher salaries, are at the top 4 categories shown here. So you can see we're very top heavy. The counterparts, which non-union, get a 3% COLA. So this chart really shows that it's really good that we retain our teachers and our students have consistency, which is why we have a great team here in Acushnet, and we've been able to do the great things that we do because of our team. But on the flip side, budgetarily, you see that the longer a teacher is here, they progress through the salary schedule, which increases their pay. In line with that, we didn't have any retirements last year, and again, I'm not aware of any for this coming year. So that provides little opportunity for us to find savings in the salary department year in and year out.
And I know it's not, a popular comparison, but in comparison to the state, our teacher average salary is still well below the state average.
That's right. So ESSER funds. We did not put any operating expenses into ESSER funds. So nothing was moved from our local operating budget to the ESSER budget. Everything in ESSER was new. And you'll see the amounts on this slide for ESSER, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3. So ESSER, those funds reflect high dosage tutoring, professional development, summer programming, maintenance worker, enrichment at the elementary school, late bus services, since we've since cut, COVID cleaning and sanitation, custodial services, and some minor renovations. So mind you, all of the expenses put towards ESSER required DESE approval to ensure funds were spent in alignment for the purposes of these grants. However, some of the ESSER expenditures now make sense in the local budget, such as the maintenance worker and the enrichment program. As you know, with the maintenance worker, it's a demanding market. The costs are up for outside help, truck charges, hourly rates, etc. So the $60,000 that we have budgeted is the highest that we would go for a qualified rate, as we want to get the most qualified candidate. And we believe that we need to spend this money to have savings, because we think we would be spending, as I mentioned before, a lot more money to fix things as we have aging buildings. Enrichment, this has been a very popular after-school program. The last 3 sessions at the elementary school, we've had nearly 200 students at each session. And also, I want to be as transparent as possible. We had a new website that was added to ESSER with a strategic plan to bring it into local. So the plan worked out, because we were able to cut 3 other services, because in the new website, it's inclusive of a one-call system. Our SMORE newsletter can all be done in this new website. And then the Civic Plus, which was the company for the old website, for the budget, is a break even or a slight savings at this point.
I'll just add one comment. So to Mr. Wonar's point, we are always evaluating everything, every year, multiple times a year. So we were able to catch that for the website, we were able to save some more money, along with other items that are.
Okay, so this has been a very lengthy process. I want to thank, lengthy and inclusive, I will say. I want to thank our budget subcommittee, who took many hours and meetings and nights to get this to this point. Our leadership in the district, as well as all of our staff. In the next steps of this process, we will continue to have collaboration via input from the school committee, our full committee, the public, as well as the town. So every single item in the budget can be aligned to our strategic objectives in the district strategic plan. And this budget that you have before you maintains level services and looks forward to growth opportunities and efficiencies. So we strongly encourage staff, all of our stakeholders really, families, the community, to engage in the remainder of the budget process. So just keep in mind that for every percentage in our budget, that represents approximately $166,940, which is the equivalent of 2.25 teachers, or 2 school buses, or Chapter 70 aid for 27 students. All budget decisions have consequences, and behind every number is a student or a teacher, etc. So just because a need goes unfunded does not mean that the need goes away.
And just in conclusion here, ultimately, again, we're coming in at 3.96% increase compared to last year, $635,000 increase in dollar value. If we were asked to be level funded, that means a deficit in level services to the value of $635,000. We can go down the list, but ultimately, what does this mean moving forward? Does it mean a reduction in staffing? Does it mean significant changes in programming? Do we entertain student fees and pass those on to families? I know we don't want to do that to our community members via taxes or other fees. Do we eliminate activities altogether? Big picture, there will be setbacks. And, ultimately we hear you. We understand this is a trying time. We've met with players all around this group and had discussions where, we're pushing the envelope, we're thinking outside the box. We've shared all the detail that we can share. There's nothing hiding. There's plans beyond FY25 to look at tuition contract changes to benefit from savings. There's opportunity with school choice to generate some income. Regionalization, let's talk about it. Is that going to save the town some money? We have an energy management service project going on. You know, we could have sat here every year and said, hey, we need this for capital, and found a way to fund it. We've gone this avenue to maximize tax incentives related to energy rebates, things like that. It's going to give us a 20-year plan on how to address some of the significant capital in our school. We've changed policies. We've increased use of facility fees to maintain our gyms, to maintain, you know, keeping the lights on, keeping the heat on. We're looking at preschool fees right now. You know, we charge preschool tuition $2,200 per student. Some of that we collect, some of that we don't. Some of that's reduced, some of that's full price. Well, I just told you back at the rates, well, maybe I didn't, but if you don't charge preschool tuition, you get to claim them in your student enrollment for Chapter 70. So that means every student that we charge tuition, we do not get Chapter 70 funds for. Because of that, we lost 20 preschool students this year. If we let them come for free, we'd get at least $2,250 per student from the state right now. That's $50 more, and that's less time for us to worry about collecting, invoicing, communicating. So we're considering that. You know, we're allowed to negotiate bids. We just had a big bus contract come in. There's talks to negotiate that price down lower via the Chapter 30B rules. And then, you know, school lunch. We're maximizing what we can charge the school lunch. You know, pest-related services, cleaning-related services, equipment-related services, plumbing, utilities, you name it. We're legally allocating that to school lunch to avoid having it in our operating budget. So we're doing the best that we can.
So thank you, and at this time, we'll entertain questions.
Thank you, Dr. Bailey. Thank you, Patrick. And we appreciate the detailed line item budget that you sent us to review. I'd like to open it up. Any questions from FinCom and Board of Selectmen?
Sorry for all of you, I'm dad on duty tonight, so I gotta go pick up my boys, but I just wanna say this before I leave. We've always enjoyed a good working relationship with the school committee and the elected body. And I think we're in a good place as far as our elected officials. They know their responsibility not only to the critical mission of education, but also to the overall taxpayer and the overall fiscal health. So I'm really confident in the process and in the system. The only thing that I would just ask is that when we get to the process, is that we all collectively honor the process of town meeting. You know, it can get pretty nasty on town meeting floor. It might be a sugar rush, a short-term win, but the long-term thing can be really damaging to the town. And you know, so that's all I would ask is that we have a process that the town has used since its inception. I ask that we continue to honor that process.
Thanks, Dave.
I'll leave it up to the professionals to decide what they need and what they don't need for the money spent.
Thank you, David. Go ahead.
So, with the numbers that you guys gave, Patrick, you have your overall enrollment down for 2025, 48 pupils, which is roughly about a 4% decrease in enrollment. Just wanted to make sure my numbers were correct on that. And you kept mentioning Old Colony's numbers and Bristol Aggie's at like a $6,400 difference per student cost. But one thing you don't mention with that is the town's budget picks up all the retirement and benefit costs of the teachers for the 145 full-time employees, where Old Colony does not. So that's not part of the budget that they're charging us, but that's part of a hidden cost for our employees.
And to that point, that's why I tried to paint the picture with net school spending. So Old Colony, yes, is on the hook for their, I'm using them because you mentioned them, nothing targeting towards Old Colony. But when you factor bottom line expenses to what's qualified to the state against net school spending, that is captured in their bottom line to be 17% over net school spending. That's also captured in our line to be 6% over net school spending.
Right, but I'm just addressing the number that you threw out to make it seem like our school is so much cheaper than what you're being charged there. But in fact, per student, when we added the difference in for benefits and retirement, it's not. Because they charge us for their portion of that expense. Rochester does not pick up, the town does not pick up those benefits for the school system, and Old Colony pays it themselves. So that's the difference plus of what the difference per student cost
Right,
is.
and then Old Colony assesses us based on those expenses as well.
Right, but our town doesn't assess you for the school department for that. It's picked up in the town's budget, not in the school department's budget.
Right, but if it was cut, we'd be $1 million, we'd be at net school spending potentially below.
I'm not talking about net school spending. I'm just trying to get clarification for the public and everybody else that the cost per student numbers that you threw out does not include the retirement number costs that the town eats for you guys and the benefit costs.
No, it
That's
does,
all.
it does. It does.
You're at
If you take-
$12,000
if you
cost
take
per
our
student.
enrollment, that was the Chapter 70 rates, but if you
Yeah.
take our overall enrollment divided by our qualified expenses, which again now makes it apples to apples, we're still well below our comparable towns.
The other thing, when you brought up the increase for Old Colony has a 13% increase in Acushnet students that are attending in 2025, where we have a 4% decrease in our own enrollment. So kind of tough to look at their straight numbers and the dollar figure saying, well, they've got this much increase that's out, when they actually have a big increase in enrollment, we have a decrease in our own.
Yeah, again, I mean, I wasn't necessarily trying to compare us to Old Colony. I was just trying to show, in a factor of Chapter 70, you know, our rates are reimbursed at a lower rate. That's all I was saying. Regardless of how much enrollment we have, we're only getting so much per dollar per student, while, you know, a vocational or an agricultural school are getting significantly more. And because our share is split between state and local, that you know, factors into the rate per student, if you will.
But, you know, we have to offer it for the kids.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
No, and again,
At
and
the
I'm
end
not,
of the day,
and
we
I
have to
don't,
pay it because our kids want to go.
and this rate's set for a reason, right? Again, we're not comparable. We don't have vocational equipment. We don't have all these other things that a school does. So it was just a
Yeah,
painting
we're
the
not in
picture.
any way implying we're not going to pay for our kids to go to
Correct,
college.
correct.
And right now, we still have a couple of years left on those high school contracts. One has 1 year left, the other one has 2 years left, and after that, we'll be looking at that. We're starting to look at it very closely now.
Is it okay if I go? I just have a couple of questions. How many positions are currently not filled?
Eight with an asterisk. So two of those 8 were not filled because we could not get candidates. So those were contracted out. So the service is still being provided in lieu of the FTE. So it needs to be carried with the intentions that we're going to fill those positions next year. Of those 8, there's also 1 ask, which is the maintenance helper that we went over, and then 2 night custodians, which also is a necessity. I mean, we all know what just happened in the district and that we had to spend a significant amount of money to keep our schools clean, and that continues to be a need, and, you know, we need to fund those positions. Included in that group of 8 is also a board certified behavior analyst, which we pay contracted services right now at extremely high rates that we believe if we can bring that local, factoring in the insurance costs that it's going to cost the town if this person were to enroll in family insurance, you know, worst case scenario, we'll still get more bang for our buck. We'll get a better hourly rate, and we'll get to utilize them 37.5 hours a week versus what we pay for an hourly rate for only about 20 hours per week.
And how much do we pay?
I can pull that up. Give me a few minutes. And then there's 2 interventionist positions that are vacant, which ultimately we are, again, offsetting those needs via ESSER with some high dosage tutoring. Ignite Reading is something that we just rolled out to address these needs. But as we know, you know, they're here. We try to fill the positions. We want to fill the positions. ESSER is going to go away, and we're still going to have those needs for students.
We also are doing math tutoring at the middle school at this point in time through ESSER because the need is still there.
So if we.
And this isn't anything that's just unusual to Acushnet. I think many school systems are having a tough time trying to hire certain positions.
Are
So-
those mandated positions, or are they,
Some of them are, the special education ones are,
yeah? What was
yes.
the, I'm sorry, Pat, what was that last one that you said?
The BCBA, the Board Certified
That one's
Behavioral,
mandated for special education services.
and that one we pay $65 an hour for. And we cap it at what we can afford, which again is not 37.5 hours a week.
And I will say with that, the needs have increased with the social and emotional issues that we've seen in the schools. So definitely the need is there to have that position.
Okay, so if I've done the math right, that's about $442,000 that we've incorporated that currently isn't being expensed, is that right?
Well, if we don't include the paraprofessionals that are contracted,
Okay, so what is currently being, so what is currently being contracted out? So you've got an
The
interventionist. that's not-
interventionist, the BCBA, the special education paras, and I believe that's
Those are being
it.
contracted out.
Yes.
So it's the custodians, the maintenance helper, and the interventionist.
correct, which to me is about $227,000.
How much, Patrick?
227,000. There's about 68 for the interventionist, 100 between the two night custodians, and then another 60 for the maintenance.
I've got a math interventionist and a TBD interventionist at AES for 67. So I've got two at 67.
But one of those interventionists, again, is being addressed via contracted services.
Well, they both are because we have Ignite and we have the math intervention at the middle school. And again, we're taking ESSER funds right now to meet the needs of the students because the need is still there. We just have not been able to hire anyone.
Okay. And did I see it correctly? We've got 145 full-time equivalents, right?
Approximately, yes.
Okay. And 94 of them are teachers?
They're Unit A members, so yes, the majority of that's teachers. I believe Unit A also includes our nurses that are on the salary schedule.
So the other 50 are,
Paras,
50?
yeah, so 145 full-time,
Oh, yes, sorry.
and
Yep.
then you have 94?
So
we got 50.
administration, custodial unit, paraprofessionals,
So the paras are,
secretaries.
how many paras
secretaries.
do we have? I'm just looking, because a one-third makeup of non-teachers seems kind of high, so I want to break that down into student-facing and non-student
Paraprofessionals,
facing.
between
Paras.
special ed and regular ed, 21.
And I guess, Pat, we've talked about this before, Patrick, too. I guess the part that I'm struggling with, I know we've talked about like the increase, the contractual increases that we got back in January, 500,000. And then we've gone through various budgets, reiterations that took it up to 8, down to 7, and I think now we're at 5 and change, right? And that is including just one custodian coming out of ESSER into our budget, right?
Are you speaking to overall salaries?
Yeah,
or-
that's just the contractual, yeah. So I think it's at 570
It's
now.
at 5.7. I can't recall preliminary numbers. I mean, some of those were estimates at the time.
Yeah.
But yes,
Yeah.
this is all encapsulating any personnel in the building,
Okay, it's just,
570,000.
I mean, there's a big fluctuation, right? We were at literally 600 in January, December, then we skyrocketed to 8, now we're down to 7.
I don't
but when I
recall
look at-
skyrocketing to 8, but again, if
This is a February budget, when I pulled the numbers. But I guess, can you help me understand, because when I look at salary increases over the number of years, okay? So we've never been that high just for standard contractual obligations. Not including additions.
so, not to
So-
cut you off, but
Yeah.
if we analyze it, if you take away all the union employees, year-over-year increase for non-union employees is $71,000. So ultimately,
$20
$500,000 is solely related to union increases, the
Yeah.
addition of the maintenance helper, and converting the BCBA from a contracted service to a FTE. Otherwise, 71%.
So contractual
71,000 is representative of everybody that is not a union employee.
So contractual increases from FY '22 was 170,000. Contractual increases for FY '23 was 202,000. Contractual increases from, and I know this is before your time, Patrick, but I can give you, these are the printouts we got.
There was also reclassifications of where employees were included and things like that, so.
Reclassifications.
As
They
far as
wouldn't be-
lines, I don't know what level
Oh,
of
no, this
lines
is,
you're
no, this is it.
comparing.
This
Okay.
is just one-page summaries, contractual increases.
Mhm.
FY '24 contractual increases 161,000. And then now we've got contractual increases of 500.
Yep, understood. I mean, the numbers are the numbers. If we look at this teacher salary projections, not to single them out, you can see, some are receiving as little as a 3%, some are receiving as much as an 8%. It was how the contracts were negotiated before my time, and
This
it's
is,
a
this
fact
doesn't
of the
include the
equation.
increase for step, or does it?
This includes a step and level, yep.
It's the COLA plus the steps and lanes.
But, so actually, to your point, so in FY '23, a master's 45, step 11, was receiving 84,000. The next year, they were receiving 86, which was a 3%. The next year, they were receiving 89, which was a 3%. You go down to some of these other lines. Master's 2 was a 4%, and now this year, all of a sudden, it's an 8%. It's just a factor of how the contracts were negotiated. Again, and I have schedules I can share with you
I mean,
to prove it.
So we can see how, when the town gets $700,000 in increases or 775, there's the struggle, right?
Understood.
With a 4% decrease in enrollment.
So, I think we sit here and I hear all the different towns and everybody pays. At the end of the day, we're just looking at it like, what do we have?
Mhm.
And how do we fairly allocate it to all the services? Because yes, school's important, and I've said this every year for how many years. My kids are in the school system. We also need police, we also need fire, and how do we spread a $775,000 increase when utilities alone have doubled for everybody, right? So,
All the struggles that you've brought up for the school system, every department in town has it. So it's not an issue that is exclusive to the school system, but it's an issue we have to look at as a finance committee to allocate what little funds we have. And if we're asking everybody to come back and be level funded for it, whether we're only 6% over minimum spending or not, there's only so much in the kitty. So if you guys get your punch list on your budget, that means nobody else gets anything else in the town for their increases that they're gonna show. So where does the money come from? That's what we have to struggle
we're
with,
wondering the
that's all.
same way. And, again, if you look at our February presentation to now, we've come down significantly.
Right, but your February presentation was also significantly higher ask. I mean, right now you have the largest increase ever asked for the school system. What it was like in February was close to double that?
Right, but-
1.2?
4% isn't the largest increase that we've
No.
ever.
Dollar-wise, I'm not talking percentage, I'm talking dollar-wise. We're only talking dollars, because we're saying this is
Yeah.
how much money the town has. We're not
But
saying what
keep
the
in mind,
percentage
like
is.
transportation alone, we were predicting a 30% to 40% increase in that alone, and it was lower,
And
thankfully.
So again, I hate to go back to the same points, but, 4.25% of our budget increases is a result of tuitions, transportation, which we made cuts within there, and salaries. So we
Right,
can't
but
cut tuitions.
The 4% doesn't have the benefits and the health and everything else that's factored into it. So I can't look at a percentage number and say that that's accurate, because the town is footing that bill somewhere else.
So
It's not in your
what's the
budget.
percentage increase on insurance costs?
Well, what was it, Mr. Kelly, 8 or 9% increase this year on health insurance alone? Never mind the retirement increase?
And
That's the
ultimately-
estimate right now.
And,
I mean, if
to
we
your
look at...
point, that's out of our control too, so.
But it needs to be part of the discussion, because in the end of the days, and it's something that I've brought up the past couple of years, it's still an expense that's incurred by the school. It's just accounted for in somebody else, so it doesn't show on your numbers. If we look at the school department as a percentage of what our overall budget is, it's 53% roughly is the school department for the town budget. If we take the benefits out for the town employees that are being covered for the school department, it brings it up over 60%.
So I preliminarily ran those figures because I want to ensure that combination of town and school, we're meeting net school spending. To your point, I'm coming up after you factor in what seems to be the trend in insurance and allocated costs to us, $17.1 million budget. So to your point, it's higher,
Yeah.
but 17.1 compared to, again, previous years, that's only a 200,000 increase in the grand scheme of things. So,
Yeah, I
you
guess.
know, however you want to shuffle it, we understand and we've identified those costs. Without those costs, we won't meet requirements and we'll lose aid. So it's definitely factored in.
Well, we're still $1 million over minimum requirements.
And
I'm not saying that we give up $1 million and cut it down to that, but I'm saying we have to be able to whittle something down, because as it stands right now, Mr. Kelly, would you say we're still 600,000 roughly over what realistically we could do as a town? It's gonna come from somewhere. Not all from the school department, but it's still gonna come from somewhere.
And I have about 1.9 million of school costs that live in the town budget. So again, that's admin allocations, that's insurance allocations.
But that's only for your,
We're discussing our
And for
budget.
what
proposed
Jesse
budget.
figures.
Right, and for
Say
IT.
that again?
That's only for you figuring out in the Jesse formulas. That's not,
Which is
that's not in your budget here.
correct.
Now, just a quick question. New positions or positions that are moving to salary town employees, how many new positions are those, so I can
The maintenance worker?
figure out a new estimate for insurance? Because everyone who comes in costs a potential $18,000 to the town.
So the maintenance worker is one, and then the BCBA, which, again, I reached out to our previous town accountant to get those rates, to say, hey, you know, their salary plus their insurance, maybe it comes in at 100,000, we're paying 125 at contracted services. So there's a savings that isn't visible, it isn't captured, but ultimately it's a $25,000 savings that we'd
I
otherwise
just
ask
need it
for.
for the estimate and insurance.
It's those two positions.
But
We
you
met,
had
there was
8
only one.
unfilled. So how are we down to 2 now?
2 new positions.
2 new, but right now
No.
we're not paying those because it's not
Unfilled
filled.
that are going to, that you're
Oh,
planning
unfilled,
to
8,
fill.
8.
So 8 times 18.
Yes.
It's 160 grand.
144,000.
Just round it up to 20.
I just would like to ask a rhetorical question. The total revenue increase this year is 1.76%. I don't like talking in percents. You know that I like talking dollars. But I'll go into your speak of percents. Total revenue increase is 1.76%. School cost increase is 3.96%. Well, that means we've got to cannibalize someplace else to make up the difference.
And we've cannibalized everything else the last couple of years to balance the budget.
I think the thing to keep, so do we have a sense of what the contractual increases will be next year?
No, because the contracts will be negotiated. This is the last year of the contracts.
I think going forward, when it comes to contract negotiations, I think these unions need to be more mindful of the overall financial stability in this town, because we can only afford so much. So to have unrealistic expectations from unions is going to bankrupt this town at some point. We can't afford big increases, and there's a lot of benefits that go along with these contracts. That I can tell you right now, nobody in the private sector gets any of that stuff.
And to your point, there's opportunity for a town representative to sit on the negotiation committee.
I think somebody from the FinCom should be allowed to sit on those contract negotiations this next time around. Just my opinion.
Just to follow up on my statement.
Well, you would be an observer.
Well, I'd gladly
I
observe.
think we're allowed one person from the town, but I can check on that.
You
But it
are.
would be an observant.
No,
observer.
one person, one voting person.
Yes, the vote at the end.
But just to continue my statement, the fair way to do this, if the total revenue increase is 1.76%, is that the school cost increase should be 1.76%, which is $282,622. That's the fair way to get this done.
I want to go back to 3 years ago, when the school added, I believe, 8 full-time employees
Two part-timers.
and 2 part-timers, and since then, I think there's been another 4,
2 and 23.
a couple more full-time employees. But going back to those 3 years ago, I distinctly remember the finance committee, we had our concerns and reservations about adding that many positions, and how would it affect the town years later. Now, here we are, with that salary line item increasing pretty big.
Do you know those positions by title, just for my record, since I wasn't in?
I don't. I just know from 22, it was 8 full-timers, 2 part-timers. It would have included the third nurse. It would have included,
So can I just
Building
say
based
something
on-
about
I
that?
just want to finish on that.
Okay.
So, our recommendation at town meeting was completely disregarded. And it was like, no matter what, didn't matter what we said.
Just with the nurse, there's a regulation that in an elementary school, when you get over 500 students, you have to add a second nurse.
I'm just, Patrick asked 2.
No,
I'm
I
just
know,
saying.
and I want to explain that, because I know we had a lot of questions in the past about 3 nurses, but we were also paying Cultured Care an exorbitant amount of money to pay for substitute nurses, when having the third nurse can cover for those 2 other nurses.
And I know we've talked about it in the past,
Yeah.
because we still had a high number of substitute nurses because of maternity leave, things of
Correct.
that nature.
Correct.
So it really hasn't reaped the benefits just yet, but hopefully it will. Because I
No, it
remember asking the
has.
question.
It
because-
has, with the third nurse, I mean, we're mandated in the elementary school to have 2 nurses. They do screenings, those offices are filled with children each and every day, and we have 1 nurse at the middle school. If the 1 nurse at the middle school is absent, then we float a nurse over to the middle school to fill in, because the cost of substitute nurses is outrageous.
And I'm just simply, I'm pulling my notes, okay? I don't remember exactly who they were, Patrick, I didn't write everything down. I do remember the nurse, I remember building the subs.
Point taken. It's-
But I think the thing is, I think I can count on one hand in the 14 years of like how many people we've added at the town side, right? We added a full-time librarian from a part-time librarian. So we're thinking about the cuts. We're cutting, we're really cutting. Do you see the difference? And I'm not saying, these roles are not necessary. I'm simply sitting here from how do you balance something when you've got a deficit of this much, when you've got 700,000 increase and 500 of that is to cover contractual obligations for one department. The math just doesn't add up.
No, and,
So-
bigger picture, it's not a FY25 problem either. It's an
But-
FY26, FY27.
Exactly
You
to my
can't
point,
continue to
because-
rely on aid, so not only, are we held to a minimum expense standard we have to meet, but we also have to find, other sources to maintain our services.
I don't
so-
disagree with you. You're preaching to the choir
Yeah.
about not thinking, not being short-sighted and having blinders and only thinking about 1 year. That was our argument for a couple of years. The ripple effect was gonna catch up with us. And so, I agree. This year is gonna be a struggle. Next year is gonna be worse.
And that's
Next
why,
year's gonna be harder to balance the budget, because whatever we're doing now, just like last year, Jamie pulled some rabbits out of hats. Those rabbits are done. We're out.
and that's why when we see 8 positions to be determined, and we're gonna increase 8 positions over what we currently have on the books, whether or not you've it's in the budget as a salary position or not, it's still 8 positions, which we're gonna have to eat the benefits for, roughly $200,000 moving forward minimum each year. On top of that, we have a 4% decrease in enrollment. So how do we justify level services if we've got roughly 2 classes worth of enrollment?
But
And we're adding 8
some
positions.
of the enrollment numbers that we saw tonight are data corrections as well. So again, 20 of those students were preschool students. In the past, they claimed students in enrollment that were charged tuitions. You
Right, but
cannot do
you
that.
got
So
funds for that?
That's 20%, that's 20. So that 4% is inflated, it's not
Okay,
really.
So it's 2%. So we're still down 2%, but you want to add 8 positions that we currently didn't have
They're
on the
not
books.
They're not asked.
They've been there, and they should have been factored into the budget for insurance purposes, knowing that those could be filled at any time, and we could be hit with that insurance cost.
But all that would have done was, in the last budget, inflated the budget numbers beforehand and asked us to fund them when we didn't have positions then either. That's like saying, I want to put something in the budget this year so that 2 years from now, we've got space there, we can hire somebody.
No, they were needed in the year that they were added to the budget, they just weren't filled. I mean, it's.
But we made it.
It's difficult in the schools to be able to fund this position. We made it thankfully to ESSER.
But you're talking about in
We
an elementary
pivoted-
school
we
that's in the
pivoted-
top 55 in the country, and it did it without those positions. So
Because-
obviously,
No,
we
but
did something right.
We have contracted services that are filling in for these positions, so the need is still there, and we're meeting them because of ESSER funding.
So are
if
we double counting? Are we
No,
double
we're not
counting?
double, well, I was just gonna say that point. So ESSER supplements, not supplants. So we're funding what would be a salary line, let's call it $60,000. We're hitting that much in contracted services instead of an FTE because the need's still there, the service still needs to be provided. But if it goes over that 60, it's being supplemented.
So, okay, so sorry, so when we're looking at FY '25's budget, and we see these TBDs in the budget,
Mhm.
contract services should be down by the comparable amount, because we're only paying one, not both. It's either contract services or we're paying that full-time equivalent salary, we're not paying both. So,
Correct.
okay, so contract
But we're not-
services in FY '25 is down.
Yes, because it's not saying we need contracted services for BCBA and an FTE for
Okay, so,
BCBA.
yeah.
It's a wash.
Okay, can you just tell me, like, where is that, just so I can make a notation? So
Yeah, I
like
mean,
BCBA goes where?
I'd have to
Are we getting
find the
a list here?
individual's name.
And again, we can't call it a wash, because at the end of the day, those 8 positions are $200,000 worth of benefits that don't show up in the budget, but we still have to pay for.
But those should have been budgeted for last year when they were added to the budget, knowing that these people are gonna come with benefits, and then that should be carried forward.
But again, when we talk about last year, and we have this, Sue, you were on film with it, when we talked about what do we do if we don't get the aid that we got this year, next year? What do we do? And we put you under the gun, and I know it's there because we went back and looked at the video. You said we'll have to cut. But we're not cutting, we're adding 8 positions. That's the frustration on our
We're
end.
not adding, Peter, we're not
We're
adding.
certainly not cutting.
They're vacant.
They're vacant,
They were
but
part
we've
of our
been paying
budget.
for them under different funds. They've just been allocated somewhere else.
Correct, so
you
they're
wanna
not, so
move
they're
them-
not an ad.
You want to move them to a salaried position, which has hidden
They were
costs for the
already-
And they
town.
were
salary
already there,
position.
that's what I don't
Yeah,
think
but
is.
the town
is-
hasn't been paying benefits on that.
But did you budget for it?
It should
You
have been
should have
budgeted
been
for, knowing
budgeted
that these
for it.
positions are expected to be filled.
Mr. Kelly,
You've
were
seen
these
the
budgeted
budget that
for?
we're up against.
No, you take the population at May, you add a certain amount, but those weren't included in the budget.
Well, so our budget was presented in May of last year, not
But I'm
with
saying,
these included, so
Right.
you
I think
take,
that's why we're having an
you
issue.
take the budget on the open enrollment, you take the population, then you figure out how many new positions, but we weren't told those were new positions.
they were,
They were in our budget, Mr. Kelly.
Yeah.
But it's not what's in your budget, it's the question that is asked, are there new positions?
Anytime there's new position, it's presented during the budget hearings,
Yeah.
and that would have been
of
presented
these
to you.
8, one of them was a new position last year. There was a reading interventionist, that was the new position. The 7 existed the year before.
The reading interventionist for the middle school.
Correct. So again, I don't know where the benefits come into play, but there was one ad from 23 to 24. So that means 7 existed in 23 and 22. So at some point, you know.
So if we, I'm sorry, let me just finish. If we look at these 8 positions to be determined, right now they're being met by bringing in outside, right? And you said on the budget, it's a wash. Then why don't we keep them as an outside and save the town $200,000 in benefits?
Because ESSER is running out.
Because we can get 40 hours of service from an FTE in-house for the same cost that we're paying a contractor for 20 hours a week of service. So we're getting double the service at the same cost after you factor in benefits.
Sorry, I think I need to go back. So Dr. Bailey, you just said we need to do this because we're running out of ESSER funds, but I thought we weren't covering.
It's supplement. So again,
So,
our budget can afford $60,000 of an FTE knowing we're getting 37 and a half hours out of those people. That 60,000 doesn't convert to 37 and a half contracted services. These contracted services charge, you know, $65 an hour, whatever. So we need 40 hours. We can afford 20 with that 60,000. Now we need to tap into ESSER to get those other 20. Unless they come to budget as an FTE, and now we get them as a employee
okay, I think
at 40 hours.
that part wasn't clear. So that to me tells me we are bringing in into our budget additional payroll that was covered by ESSER.
No.
Well, you're
We're
just-
capturing the
saving
service at a lesser cost.
Right.
We can pay, based on an hourly rate, we can pay an FTE half of what we
It was covered by
pay.
ESSER. Help me understand.
Half of it.
because-
Let's just use half. So a $100,000 employee, let's call it, right? Or excuse me, a $50,000 employee we can get for, let's call it $25 an hour, right? In-house, we need
Yeah,
this employee at $25 an hour, up to $50,000 an hour. But when that isn't an FTE and it turns into contracted services, and they're charging us $50 an hour, we have to pay $100,000 to get the value of a $50,000 FTE. So we are now using that $50,000 that we had, that we thought we were gonna fill a position, and then we're tapping into ESSER to make up the difference of those services, to be able to provide them. So by bringing this and hiring a position as we hope to,
And adding the benefits of,
and adding the benefits, again, which we factored in, we bring in,
Your
In
net
this-
savings is $30,000.
yeah,
ballpark.
and we get more hours, or level, excuse me, we'll get level services.
But my frustration is a big joint meeting a year ago. The specific question was brought up by Sue. What do we do next year if these ESSER funds are gone?
We hire in-house, which is these
No,
vacant
the
positions.
answer was we have to make cuts. That was what was given to us, so that's our expectation. It isn't, well, we hire it somewhere else and budget for it somewhere else.
There's no operating expenses in ESSER, so there's no operating savings when ESSER expires.
But that was our point, because we were looking at bringing in
But you,
services.
to
for
the point of
employees.
ESSER, you cannot supplant your local expenses into a grant. It's illegal. So there will be no savings, because we need to provide the same level of services that were budgeted in our local fund that we're extending to ESSER.
I don't know.
so when I look at the budget, okay, I see the BCBA. Where is the contract, which is the account number that has the contract services that is being paid out of now?
So right, so I have to go back to FY '24 to find that for you, which I can do right now.
Because that's where you're gonna see the drop when you look at the comparison.
Correct.
Well, first a correction, if adding those positions, the change in the health insurance would be 18.4 service,
Yeah, you were
10
right.
to 11.
20. Because his retirement was going to be factored in.
Yes. But everybody's getting in the weeds. You've got $778,360 to divide among everything, as far as the increases go. Everybody's got an ask. Everybody wants to have a certain level of service. You can't afford it. I'm going to say the words that no one wants to hear. You've got to cut and lay off. It's the only way you're going to balance the budget.
The way you prioritize. on what.
I don't
matters.
care how the priorities are. If you've got a $2 million expense increase, a deficit of $1.3 million, you've got
But what
to
do we prioritize the
cut-
things, Sarah?
The departments. That's
So we
it.
lay off police and fire, which
Well, we
have
just
already been
gave
laid
them
off.
a, what, 16% increase with their union contracts, we can't do that, they're just all under contract now. But it has to come from somewhere.
So-
And
Exactly.
we're actually looking to the town of, we know this is happening every single year, right? For years, we're gonna increase, inflation, costs increase every single year. So we go to the town, we have cut as much as we can to get the services for our children that we need. And we've cut substantially since February, which I said we were going to do. And we worked very hard doing it. Now we'd like to know, what is the town gonna do to help us bridge the gap?
But the
What
town-
else can we do?
But Sarah, if we just look at the basic economics here, 775 is the increase. The school is asking for how much? If we do nothing else at the town level and don't raise a single dime, we still don't have the money to give the school what they want.
With that said though, what if the state does give, so we thought the state was gonna give us a certain percentage and they were 1.5% off, correct? We were.
No,
2.5%.
2.5% off. What to say in April or May that they don't turn around and say, you know what, we figured it out, we're gonna get it, and then we're right where we need to be, right, the town?
But I think the important thing is.
That's one option, that's right, one particular option. The other option is, you know, when does the town decide that this is a emergency and we need to get the funds from somewhere else? And again, I will leave that up to the town, but when do we say the sky is falling and it's raining and we have to fix this because we have a, you know, 3 to 6 year plan with potential regionalization or contracts coming up with high school tuition? You know, where's the plan? And that's what I'm going to ask, you know, the town as well as the finance committee, like, when is it raining and what can we do to bridge this gap?
Let me just add one factor, excuse me, that hasn't been mentioned yet, that there's a report that came out March 13th. The State Department of Education, in its formula, and I think maybe Jason Kelly's the only guy that knows all about the formulas, but anyway, that they underestimated inflation costs in the formula. So therefore, towns, cities and towns did not get the inflation factor that they should have, you know. And actually, the inflation factor for educational institutions was 7% one year and 8% the previous year. So the state underestimated by almost half of what they should be reimbursing cities and towns. And we think, is this a bump in the road? Or, you know, where if it's a bump in the road, now this is where we've got to make some determinations here. Are the state going to correct that formula mistake?
Let me check my crystal ball, Joe.
Or no? It's real stuff, because many cities and towns are in the same position that we are, and we're talking right now. So you know, so it's, the pressure is on. But, wait a minute,
for right now,
excuse me.
we have to
If it's
deal
a-
with what we've got.
If we've got to determine that if it's a bump in the road, then that's what we have rainy day funds for.
Yes.
If we determine, we've got to, you know, really, that it's a long-term thing, then that's another factor. But I think basically, is this a one-year, you know, phenomenon of not the increase of, in dealing with inflation? You know, is only half of what we should have been getting, you know, for the inflation rate in that formula. So I just want to, you know, put a word of caution before we start, you know, saying, oh, we want to be, you know, draconian cuts and and layoffs and all that sort of stuff. I think we better basically
Well, I'm just
be
going to something
more
that.
cautious as far as
I'm just
how
going
we're
to
going to plan
something-
this, in meeting a balanced budget. So that's all I'm going to say.
I'm just going to go back to something we talked about before, which is in the stats, the state expects us to put in a higher percentage into our net school spend, into our budget, right, for the schools. And so the expectation, I believe we asked the question, the expectation was is we don't expect any significant increase in Chapter 78 because we're still not footing the bill that the state wants us to foot. Patrick, I think we talked about this
That's
during one of our meetings.
Yeah, but
So I guess to go to that point, John, and so I don't know, is there something out that they're saying, hey, we expect an increase in 2 years from now? Because last time I checked, the millionaire's tax was.
Discussion.
But that's the thing, so it's still in discussion, so what do we do this year? What we know is the
Well,
problem.
we determine if it's a
But
bump in a
here's
road,
the
a
thing.
dip, and they're going to correct that mistake that they made. I interpret it as a mistake.
and
If
so
they're
the
going to correct it, then it's only a one-year phenomenon. Therefore, that's what we have rainy day money for.
But wait a second, so the
But
answer
if
would be.
it's a long-term
so
one-
let's play that forward, okay, let's
another story.
take that and let's play it forward, right? So the rainy day fund is our stabilization. Stabilization has how much money in it right now, Mr. Kelly?
Just over $3 million.
$3 million. So we're talking about using stabilization to balance the $1.2 million deficit. That's going to take it down to $1.8 million. We also need to figure out something for the school's ventilation system so we don't end up with the mold. For that, we have to bond, okay? We take out $1.2 million out of stabilization. What happens with our bond rating, Mr. Hopcroft? Okay? What happens with our interest rates? Okay? So I am being mindful of that because I'm sitting in those meetings. I sat there. We need to do something with the schools because we'd be dumb not to have to be put in the same position. But for that, we're going to have to bond, chances are. For that, we're going to have to borrow from the state. And we're going to have to pay interest rates, which are really high. Do we really want to take money out of stabilization? That's one. We take out $1.2 million this year, tack on inflation, what do we need next year? Stabilization is gutted, completely gone. Okay, now let me finish, because let me tell you something, Mr. Hallcroft. When COVID hit, I took a 35% pay cut, okay? 35% pay cut to sustain the firm. Do you know what I did? I didn't take my money out of savings. I cut my expenses.
Well, that's the difference between the private sector and the public sector.
But no, the point I was
Okay,
making,
so-
I said, is this phenomenon a mere bump in the road or
You tell us,
a
Mr.
long-term
Hopcroft, is
trend?
it?
And I'm just saying, let's advising caution, not running out and okay, we're gonna start sending out pink slips tomorrow. This is what I seem to be
But-
picking out. No, we're not gonna lay anybody off.
But even if it's a
I'll tell you
bump
right
in the
now.
road,
But
what
how do
she's
we
saying
balance
is if
the-
we fix
I
it with a
don't-
bump in the road like you want to and take it out of a rainy day fund, it's gonna cost us more money for the other things that we need to do as a town by bonding out things. It's not a solution, because it's gonna hurt us somewhere else, it's just not gonna hurt the budget there.
We look at what we're faced with. We have the Student Opportunity Act, which basically that we have to refine and increase the performance among a certain class of students. We can't retreat and start, now it may take a plan on our part as far as how, reorganize, job descriptions of, who's performing what and whether this, and that be basically not for laying off, but basically for efficiency. But, so we've got the demands of the school, Student Opportunity Act that we have to fulfill. So layoffs will put us in a negative as far as those accomplishments.
Well, if that's the only thing we can do as a town, if it comes down to the point where we've cut our budgets so much in all the different departments that people need to start being laid off, then that's what the
Right.
answer is gonna be.
What I'm trying to say is not, that shouldn't be the simple solution.
But
okay?
if you look forward to next year.
But it's not until we determine whether the State Department of Education is going to acknowledge that they made a mistake and they're going to
Well, if
reformulate.
they don't acknowledge
that
that
gonna
next
happen?
It may
month,
be a
then we need
it may be
to.
a 1 year dip.
Yeah, well, if
But
that's
what
the
you're-
case, then for the 1 year, you may be affected negatively and you can be up the following year. Let me ask you, Patrick, a question because it's pertinent. When we start looking at 2025, we've got your budget, right? What's 2026 going to look like when we start factoring in your salary increases and contractual increases with everything else staying extra? Because right now, we know it's not going to stay extra. How much of an increase dollar-wise are we looking at for 2026 with the budget that you currently have proposed? Because that's the hole we've got to fill next year.
If that's a rhetorical question,
Right.
okay, but again, we don't have our contracts for 26 and our
Right, but
salary.
you know it's not gonna stay even.
Correct.
Stabilization is at most 2 years, and you completely gut the
Well,
town. And what happens,
I'm not
but
being-
help me understand something then. Do you
And
know
look,
what happens when we file?
I've been that road, I've been that road.
But John,
Don't
let me
worry.
ask you a question.
You know.
What happens when we run out of money? What happens when the town has to
the
file
question-
bankruptcy?
I
Go into
think your question's
receivership?
not appropriate in one
So
sense.
respectfully,
In the sense that I'm talking about, if the formula has been not accurate, and we're going to, and it's going to be corrected next year, okay? And this is where we got to be, a one-year mistake.
Okay, hang on, I want to say something.
That's what I'm talking about.
It's not going to be a one-year thing. I want to point out a couple things that's going on right now
Talk about chapter
in the state, okay? So the Massachusetts State Pension Fund currently has an unfunded liability of $35 billion. That ranks us 40th in the country. So we're at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to funding the state pension fund. Pensions should be funded more in line with the private sector, but they're not. That's a conversation for another day. The other elephant in the room is OPEB, other post-employee benefits. Actual total OPEB liability in the state of Massachusetts as of June 30th, 23 was $16.4 million. The other factor is the $1 billion being spent by our state on illegal immigration. So if you don't think those things are factors in state aid, they are. Those are definitely factors in state aid. So state aid is not gonna, to Sarah, we're not getting no increase in state aid, I can tell you that. There's no bailouts. The bailouts are done.
Mr. Chairman, may I speak? So I don't know where all this imaginary money's gonna come from, but I talked about it when Mr. Kelly gave us our revenue projections, and I called his 3% an ambitious number in the state aid, right? So obviously I know a little bit about the town's finances, and if you look at chapter 70 aid, we average an increase in the last 4 years of $80,000. This year we're gonna get $35,000. Last year they gave us an additional $700,000. They gave you the juice last year. They're not gonna give you the juice again, Mr. Howcroft. And if you just went back to what we average bring in additional is $80,000. They're not gonna keep pumping money into the system. Patrick just made that comment that they wanna get us to 80%, we're roughly 62 to 64%. State aid, we're all relying on the state to keep whipping money around. We already know, based on the conversation, state aid's going down, and they're gonna be more dependent on the taxpayers of Acushnet to fund the school system. Is that the moral of the story, Patrick?
that's what the formula
So,
is.
they ain't coming in with their magic wands in the federal government, the drunken sailors down there just whipping stimulus money out. You got the Federal Reserve on one side raising interest rates, trying to stop inflation, but you got the drunks in the federal government throwing stimulus money in, creating inflation. So all you gotta do is tell the left hand, the right hand's gonna tell the left hand, stop doing what you're doing, and I won't have to continue doing what I'm doing and create this problem, right? They're bankrupting America is what's happening. That's what's happening before our eyes, for everybody to understand exactly what's happening to us Americans right now. They're bankrupting the middle class. So, to go back to the overall discussion of what the town has, let's just call it $1 million the town has. If the school system is 40% or 50% of the budget, then you would assume that you would get $500,000, not $700,000, if that was the assumption being made. We have a police department contract, and it hasn't been resolved yet. That's for town meeting to resolve, okay? There's an obligation there for public safety we have to do. We also had a regional school come in, and I heard some discussion about it, and I didn't want to talk about it tonight, but they came in with an unreasonable request of $450,000 as well. So we have 200 students, 198 students going to Old Colony in all 4 grades, and they came in with a $450,000 increase. We have an Acushnet Public Schools that educates roughly 1,000 students. 1,000 students, and can we really fool ourselves to say, if we're gonna give the regional school $450,000 for 200 students as an increase this year, should we be looking at giving nothing to a school that educates 1,000 students, right? So I think from that perspective, everybody gets that perspective. There's gotta be some level of funding that's gonna be there. We're still moving around pieces of pies to figure out exactly what we need. Is the magic number, I don't know if there's a magic number to throw at school committee and say, this is the magic number. I would hope that we're gonna get to that. The Board of Selectmen hasn't seen a budget yet. The Board of Selectmen are gonna have to do some serious thinking and maybe make some tough decisions on cuts to free up some money from some of the other increases that we're seeing. I mean, you just put the police contract and you put Old Colony in, that $778,000 Mr. Delgado talked about, history, let alone the town's fixed cost. Nobody else, no other budget impacted. There's a lot for us to be considering. The Board of Selectmen got an exorbitant amount of work to do when we start looking at budgets. It's not gonna be an easy year, of course not. It's never an easy year. We're gonna do our best to figure things out. I think the moral of the story is what we want is for the school committee to do the same. And we gotta also remember this, the more the town spends, the more people pay in taxes in this town. And I know that's okay for some people to say, I'm willing to give an extra couple $100 if that's what it means. But you also gotta look at the way the composition of the town is made up with our seniors and the things of the like. We got a pretty good percentage of our population that are on fixed incomes and our senior citizens. We can't just sit here and kid ourselves and say, we don't care about the senior citizens of this town. The only one we care about is ourselves, and what we want is what we want. And I'm not saying that's what you folks are doing. I'm saying for everybody in general. I'm facing that with a regional school right now. Seems to be that mentality, right? There's plenty of people that want, but we just can't give. And I think we all need to be conscientious of what the composition of our community is made of and stop only caring about ourselves and start caring about thy neighbor, right? Because that's what made America great. And I think we're just declining when everybody just wants to continue to spend, and we don't give a damn about our next door neighbor, the senior citizen or the single parent, right? We haven't talked about that. Single parents that have children in the school that can't afford their taxes to go up $200 or $300 on top of the $200 or $300 they're already going up on. If you want to talk override, which in my opinion would never fly and hasn't fly in any other community around here. So I think we all just need to get back to the table. I think FinCom's got to go back and look at the budgets that are up significantly and say, you know, maybe they listen to the Board of Selectmen's recommendations. What are we going to do? I mean, Old Colony, again, bringing them up, $450,000 increase. Unacceptable in my opinion. Totally unacceptable in my opinion. And I don't care about the 18 additional students that are going to a school, because regardless of that, you still need the same amount of teachers as long as you fulfill that classroom, right? So it doesn't matter if I have 400 students going to a school or I got 500 students going to school. Staff is still staff. You still need that staff, right? So that whole gibberell of, oh, I got 18 more students, that's a bunch of BS in my opinion. We need to figure that out with everybody. All these different budgets, we need to figure this stuff out, and that's where we're at.
I want to just impart one issue.
Sue, hold on. Sue
No.
and then Sarah.
Sorry, to that point though, the way we get to the 600 or the 400,000 Old Colony's asking us is because they have fixed costs and they're spreading it over the students. And we just have a bigger percentage of that pie. Pie hasn't gone up.
Well,
It was, the pie went up 2.7, we just got a bigger piece of the pie. So I'm thinking about it a little bit differently than you are, Kevin.
All right, well, we can compare
We have
notes.
notes sat at that
We
table.
can
at the
compare,
same-
right, we can
No,
compare
but we gotta
notes.
think about that. Their increase is 2.7. We just got a bigger piece of the pie because we have that many more kids there. So we gotta think about it that way, one, okay? And the only other thing, Mr. Hallcroft, I hear what you're saying, okay? And what if things reset next year? But if we don't fix things, but if it doesn't, we are now one more year behind the eight ball.
Well,
That is my concern. And keeping in mind, you know, you've been here, the recommendation is that stabilization have anywhere from 5 to 15% of your operating budget. And that's how we keep that better bond rating. We are at 10. We take out 1.2, we drop it by what? 40%? We're down to what, 6%? Our bond rating is shit, and we're now in violation of the state's recommendation. We're balancing all of these pieces, Mr. Hallcroft, right? It's a balance. You're thinking about school, and we're thinking about the town overall.
because I could claim a personal privilege as far as Mr. Gaspar's comments. It's not that we want money. In the sense,
You
we
need it.
want
We
to
get it.
educate the children of this
Yes.
community so they can have a better future in their lives. and parents
And nobody
say,
disagrees with you
I
at
pay
all.
my taxes, so
Nobody
my child got a
disagrees.
good education,
Nobody
and they have a
disagrees.
quality life. That is why we're in
That's
the
what we
business.
all want for our kids,
That's what we all
1,000%.
want.
Nobody's
So,
arguing
you know,
that.
so I take personal privilege that we're somewhat, looking for money just for some greed. No, we're looking
Mr.
at money
Hawcroft,
to
if I had it, I would give it to the school.
valuable asset
And
our
I would give it
children
to
in this
everybody.
community. And so therefore, what we have to do is work cooperatively
Yes.
and long-term in order to solve this problem. I just said, raised the issue that we may have a dip, not maybe a long-term.
But why do you think it's a dip when everything else seems to be indicating this is a trend? And that's why we talked about, like, the state expects us to pony more cash in.
Because we have more valuable real estate and more rising income in this community. That's what the formula
Okay, but
starts
the formula
falling
is
in.
screwed up because the formula takes into consideration, it looks at the Department of Revenue stats and says, what's the income from anyone that has a 027, God almighty, can't even think of our own zip code here, and says, okay, because this person makes X amount of money, therefore somehow that's correlated to the value of my house and how much I pay in real estate taxes. Mr. Hawcroft, I've lived in the same house since moving to Acushnet, okay? When I was making nothing, okay, commuting to Boston on a daily basis. I make more than that. My house value has not appreciated in any sort of correlation to my salary. The number is different.
And when we talk about trends, we knew this was coming last year. This was part of our discussions last year. We said this was going to happen. We're going to run into deficit, we're getting ourselves in trouble. And here we are. So it's not a blip because we've seen it coming and it was part of our discussion.
Every department.
Sarah.
All right, Sarah, go ahead.
So just 2 comments to that. Every year, we run as a deficit. I've been doing this for 9 years. Every year, we run as a deficit at this particular meeting with the group of us. And then somehow, other figures are circulated, and we all get to the end game in June at the town meeting, mostly, except for that 3-year part, where, again, there was just a disagreement between our offices. Now, with that said, with you saying, Mr. Gaspar, that, we're not increasing revenue, it is what it is, we're trying to work every single year with what we have. Yes, we seem to do that every year. Is there a plan, Mr. Gaspar, for the town to somehow generate other income moving forward, sort of like a 5 to 10 year plan of our town to generate more income so this doesn't happen every year with every single department?
I don't know if I have a crystal ball to be able to tell you where new revenue can come from.
Is there a plan from the town, or are you discussing it? with the-
Services, it's what you're looking at.
I'm sorry?
No,
No cuts. I'm talking about
No, she's
revenue.
talking about bringing in more
How are we
revenue,
bringing-
just
Master
so you can
brand.
spend.
Like, is there a plan? Like, we have, as a school committee, we have our goals. We have our IT plan, we have our budget plan, well, not a budget plan, but we have our superintendent plan. Is there something, and I never asked this question, and I can't believe I haven't, but is there a plan for our town, knowing that we have to do this every single year and there's cuts? Is there something to generate revenue in the future? Is it being worked on from our selectmen or our finance committee to generate the income so we don't have to do this every single year? Mind you, there'll always be cuts because we'll always want to run
Just spend
efficiently,
more.
but is there a plan? Or will there be a plan?
I don't know what a town can do to generate revenue outside of new growth with people coming in and developing land or developing commercial property, right? Where else would you generate revenue from?
That would be,
I think we talked about like the golf course having like a country club type situation.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I'm just
that's.
wondering if there's talk
problem
about
with-
something.
so
I'm
it
asking.
would be-
Minor or what?
So with the golf course though, the revenues can only
That's
be
just what we
generated
talked
if
about.
you brought in extra money, which the business model there should be changed and we could be making a lot more money. And if they did what I recommended 10 years ago, we would already have $2 million of the clubhouse would already be paid off and we'd be springing in money, buying ambulances and fire trucks and police cruisers all in a house with the golf course. But the problem is that's never been done and it's falling apart. So in the revenues that come from the golf course, there's only a certain category, I think, Mr. Kelly, right? Just, you can't,
It's an
Just-
enterprise.
but it's capital stuff, right? It's not operating. So it's not revenue that could be used in an operating, it's more for capital purchases. And those capital purchases would be, i.e. like fire EMS,
Yes.
police,
Again,
cruises
golf
and things
course
of the
is
like.
not the
But
top
there's
of my
no
list.
way, I mean, even if you look at a commercial facility, if you brought in, you know, even like a Walmart, and not that anybody in Acushnet wants a Walmart, but let's just speak on your,
Just, I'm wondering.
any kind of plan to bring in revenue, I
Yes.
mean, what do you do? Even if you bring in a Walmart, what are you gonna get in taxation from a Walmart? And then once that money's spent in year one, everybody sucks that pie dry in year one? What are you doing in year 2 or 3 or 4? It's the same thing with all our new growth. Everybody just thinks, you know, it's this chemistry that goes on in people's brains that just think, oh, new growth, new growth, new growth, and we have to keep developing. But you bring in new growth in 1 year, like the new growth that we always use, say the 250, 300,000 bucks. Once you spend that 250, 300,000 bucks, it's gone forever in that year. So now the next year you're waiting to see what you do for new growth again. And once you spend that money, that revenue's gone forever. Once it gets sucked into somebody's budget, it's gone forever. That new growth doesn't just keep compounding over and over. What does compound is the expense. Once I give it that money to somebody, that money's gonna be compounding as a percentage, especially like we talked about with salaries. If somebody's position, the janitor position, 60,000 bucks, 50,000 bucks, that's gonna compound at a 2 or 3%, 4%, 5%, depending on that step thing with your contract. It could be up to 7%, right? So that 50 grand will turn into 70 grand in 5 years. And you have a shortfall because you only had 50,000 injection in year 1, and in year 5, you're at 70. You got a $20,000 shortfall on the first
With
injection.
that school of thought, though, this town would have been bankrupt, like, since its inception, 2 dozen times, because you're saying that we're not increasing.
The spending has gone at a
Spending,
much
but-
more rapid rate in the last decade than what it has in the previous
But
50
that's due
years,
to
if you look at that.
erratic
And there's a
inflation.
number of factors that fall into that,
I mean,
right?
it's huge inflation, right, so it's not.
So, you know, we talked, it's funny because, you know, you talk about inflation, right? But inflation really peaked somewhere at the end of 2022, 23, right? And that was peaked at somewhere around 9%, okay? And now we're running probably a 3.5 inflation rate, okay? The Fed's target is like 2%. They're never gonna get to 2%, but we're running right around 3%. Excluding food and energy, right, which is the 2 biggest inflationary factors that are in inflation. That's why the Fed excludes it from CPI, which blows my mind, right? But they do it. And you know, last year when we talked about budgets, we didn't have all that inflation. Nobody was talking, but that was really the height, the peak of inflation. But nobody was really talking about it. Now we're down here on the slope, and all of a sudden, everybody's talking about inflation, and I'm sitting here scratching my head going, wait a minute, if there was a year to talk about inflation really kicking you in the head, that would have been last year to discuss that inflation thing.
Which we did, we talked
Right?
about it.
I'm sure that
Yes.
some people did, and some people are just blaming this year on inflation. And I'm scratching my head because I look at other people's budgets and I go, well, if food and energy is the biggest one, and I'm looking at a particular budget, and I'm looking at it going, yeah, your energy costs really didn't go up, and that's the biggest part of inflation, but yet you're tagging inflation everywhere else in your budget saying inflation, 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 but energy is probably the biggest inflationary factor there is, and your budget ain't reflecting that hyperinflation that you want everything else to be tagged along, right? So again, it's an extremely difficult process. We don't know if the deficit is, you know, whatever we say at 1.3 or it's 1.0, right? There's that 300,000, whatever it is. There's always that wishy-washy number, like you just said about state aid. We don't know where it's gonna be. Maybe they come in and they give us the 3%. I said to Mr. Kelly 3 months ago when he first blurted that number out of his mouth, I have it on my paperwork, it's on film. I said it's a very ambitious number because I know the 4-year trend is $80,000 a year. And I think he put 3, which came out to like 240 or something like that on Chapter 70. They gave us the 3% on unrestricted aid, right? But that's the peanut number. That's not where you want the 3%. You want the 3% on the 7-point-something million dollars that we're carrying in Chapter 70, right? That's where you get the big chunk of money from. We didn't get it. Maybe that number does come in, Sarah, instead of the 0.5 where it's $35,000 increase, which is a drop of 50 from our normal average increase in chapter 70, right? So maybe even if we go back to the average and we get the 80 grand from the 35, it's only 50 grand. That's all it is. You know, it's not a lot, and for us, the Board of Selectmen, we're doing everything we can to look at different ways we could do business right now because of the economics of hiring and everything else. You're gonna hear us do a lot of different things and be creative outside the box. Can everybody do that, Sarah? I'm not saying everybody can do that. Can everybody at least be mindful of it and look at the positions and say, is it possible we do this with that person and that, and we can do this? That's up to you folks.
And still keep the objective and the.
That's correct, that's correct. So, right, so you have a level of services, and we did it a couple of years ago with our conservation agent, right? We had a full-time conservation agent. I basically made the case that you don't need a full-time conservation agent. We ended up with a part-time conservation agent. We split the salary 50%, and we made out better with a part-time agent than we did a full-time agent. There's certain jobs that you look at in municipal government, at least I do anyway, because I'm a businessman, right? And the first thing I do when I go into a business is I cut all the fat, right? I look at the fat and I say, where's the fat? And that's how I make a business successful, is by trimming out all the fat. So what I do is I look at certain departments that we have, and clearly I can see that there's certain jobs that we have now as full-time jobs. I know I can make those part-time jobs, and I can still give a level of service to the residents that they won't even miss a beat. That's what we're doing right now.
As long as they don't miss a beat.
That's what it's all about.
Just one,
I want to get back to some of these line items, because we have some questions, and, you know, we're getting late here. So before we go off on another tangent, I want to get into some of this. Contractual increases, whether it's union, non-union. Now, when OC came in, the superintendent was right there, his business manager was there, and I used those two positions as examples right when they were sitting in front of me. So I'm going to use the superintendent salary increase from FY24 to FY25. It's a 12.4% increase year over year, $21,000. Curriculum director, 11% increase, $11,000 and change. Those are big increases that the town cannot afford. Big department head increases like that. I don't think there's any other department head in our town, now, correct me if I'm wrong, Jamie or Kevin or Bob, if there are any other increases that big.
There isn't. There never will be, as far as I'm around.
So what we're trying to do, we have to limit spending. So when we see increases like that, it makes us scratch our head. Now, another one that I'm gonna highlight is a travel line item. Is it necessary to spend $8,000 to go on an out-of-state trip for a national conference that could possibly be attended either online or remotely? It's just a question. Look, we're trying to find every dollar we can in this budget. So if I see $8,000 being spent, it's gonna make me wonder what's going on.
At what conference can be attended online?
I'm just
I
saying.
think you're referring to the National Superintendent's Conference. That was not able to be attended virtually.
There was something that looked up like it was, available online on a daily basis.
No.
But that's still that's taxpayer money funding that. That's a lot of money to travel out of state.
Well,
I mean, is that normal?
For 2 people.
Is that normal and customary? I know it's for 2 people.
Yeah.
Is that normal and customary to attend that every year?
Yes.
It is.
Well, I think that's something to look at. I mean,
The school committee looks at professional development budget. We really feel that it's important for our district to have leadership that is going to conferences like this where they're learning best practices, staying ahead of the curve. It's important for our students. I mean, at that conference that you're referencing, Dr. Bailey was able to discover a free curriculum for a district that has actually saved us money.
but with all the
So being
technology
a
we
part of
have.
those things are really, we do feel that that is very important for our students and for our teachers, to make sure that our leadership is well-informed and, ahead of the curve, understanding best practices. Our school deserves that, our students deserve that. We deserve the best.
I'm not saying they don't.
So sometimes you
Okay,
have to
but
spend money to
sometimes
save
when
money
businesses-
in the
when
long run.
businesses-
So, for example, our middle school science program, Open Syed, is an open source curriculum. It's free. We got that through a conference.
Those things
We have
to
memberships.
buy.
We have memberships to superintendent organizations. There's 2 main conferences a year. One is at the state level, one is at the national level. Those are the best conferences. And when we're leading a district of 1,000 children and nearly 150 staff, we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can for the best student outcomes. And it is money well spent because, you know, we're learning legal things, et cetera. There's so many changes in education that if we did not keep up on it, we would be in trouble. It's kind of like when computers came out, you know, what do you do with computers? Now it's AI. What do you do with AI?
I don't think Dr. Boucher is saying stop all training. I don't think that's what he's saying. I think what he's saying is we have to look at it a little finer. Instead of 2 people going out of state for a conference for $8,000, maybe 1 person goes for $4,000. Little things like that, you still get the benefit of learning, you get the benefit of absorbing all the knowledge and taking those tools home, come back with it, implement it for half the price. Little things like that. It's fully capable. It's just-
Hold on, I would absolutely agree with that. However, these national conferences are huge. So to send 2 people for the amount of money that we are paying for this, they potentially could come back with $100,000 worth of savings for us, which is huge.
This was the National Conference on Education?
Yeah, and they've never been before, so.
I'm sorry, Sarah.
Yes.
National Conference on Education?
Yes, yes.
Conference daily online.
No,
No.
that is not correct.
No.
I'm looking at it, I saw it.
So we
It's
looked into
AASA.
this. We looked into this, Sue.
There is no virtual part on that
There
conference.
isn't.
Okay, then,
It might be a different one.
I'm looking at National Conference for that.
Well, I appreciate you looking at it,
I
but
mean,
take
so-
my word,
It
there's
does-
no
it does-
virtual national conference.
So-
I can tell you that I sat down in a group at a table with like maybe 5 of us, and the attention I got from this national Google, the national educator, there were people there from Singapore, China, the experts are in the field. You don't get that, number one, in a virtual conference. I attend a lot of virtual conferences, and I think we learned from COVID that we don't get everything we need to get when it's virtual. The 2 conferences that, the state and the national one, there is no virtual.
So going back to your point, where we're in a deficit every year. Yeah, absolutely, because we have X amount of money and people coming with their asks, and then we compare that to the
Right, and we
budget.
need to save money any way we can.
Okay, in the 14 years I've been doing this, in the 9 years you've been doing this, has the deficit ever been at $1.3 million?
I don't recall.
I can tell you it hasn't. And I've been doing it 14, we've never been at a $1.3 million deficit that I can recall, sitting here on March 20th.
At this point in time?
At this point in time, it has never been this large, Sarah. It has
How much?
never been this large.
What's the second? Have we been like 800,000?
Maybe 6, half. So the thing is I think we need to realize the rabbits are not gonna come out of the hat
I
for
completely-
1.3.
I
So,
agree. So we need to do everything we can to try to save money, and that's what we're doing. We're thinking outside of the box.
okay.
And that's what we're doing. We're cutting where we can cut.
And so it's how do we share this 1.3? How do we share the 1.3 deficit?
I still have a really hard time, and I know it's just me discussing doing all of this and possible cuts when the number in my 9 years has always changed in some way a month later. So I know you hate to hear that, Sue, but it's
But how do
true.
we do what we need to do to get ready for town meeting? Okay, because here's the thing, remember 3 years ago, we sat here and we're like, we need to cut, we need to cut, we need to cut. And then, you're right, at the very last minute, and the only people who hadn't presented was the school, and all of a sudden, we got an extra 500,000. And that extra 500,000 went to balance the school's budget. And everybody else had already presented, and we literally said, don't you dare ask for anything. So, we've been saying that to the rest of the town for a really, really, really long time.
We do everything.
We haven't added. We have not added to anybody other than, like I said, we converted a librarian from part-time to full-time for the children's room for the kids. Like, we haven't added anything. The only way,
With inflation and not adding anything, how are they even functioning, these departments? I guess that would be one of my questions.
we wondered
It's a
that,
struggle.
Sarah.
What did
We
they do
wondered
last year to make it so they only need, they can still function this year without adding any?
We're not adding
That's
bodies.
a question that I have.
No, we're not adding bodies, we're cutting bodies.
We're
right?
not adding bodies, we're cutting. Look at Kevin's example, what we did, right? That's what we have done in the past.
That's only
What
a
do you
small
wanna-
example of what we're
What do you
doing.
want to do? You want to cut the conservation agent completely? We can't do that. We also have to be mindful of, we need to function as a town, right? We need people at the offices to collect revenues for the town. We need people to inspect the buildings. We need those, right? So how do you balance that? You can't gut departments. You can't, like, Kevin and I will agree to disagree with the town planner. Like, town planners pay for themselves. Guess what? We've cut that. And even though it doesn't, because we're thinking of other things, combining it with other, maybe combining with other departments.
And it's still not raining, right? It's still not raining.
It's been raining.
But
So we-
Sarah,
so-
the
It was
point
raining
being,
last
So
year.
the town
we
point
said-
planner.
being, you don't use
The town planner hasn't
savings.
been
I know
cut.
we're getting off key.
Yes, do
Right.
not use.
Well, we're just talking about budgets and finding ways, so the town planner hasn't been cut, but what we have done is, we've gone out and advertised, okay? And that didn't work,
Right.
okay?
It's very
But
difficult.
do you really wanna go out and just say, okay, so now I'm gonna put a salary on a town planner, and town of Acushnet, we're gonna pay $100,000 for somebody that's gonna sit in an office and maybe put in 2 or 3 hours a day and pay them $100,000, and then we got the mentality of everybody else going, wait a minute, I work harder than that person, and I'm only making $70,000, and that's the cycle you get on. So we did bump a salary, we went out to advertise. Quite honestly, Mr. Kelly, I'll tell you, I watch MMA constantly just to see what salaries are doing and what other people are paying, so that I can't get the wool taken over my eyes when somebody's saying, oh, this is what they're paying. No, I already know what they're paying, right? And the reality is now that regionalization thing we just talked about in our last meeting 2 days ago, or yesterday, or whatever the hell it was. I go to so many meetings nowadays, I don't even know what meeting I'm in anymore. We just talked about regionalization, right? We're talking with Mattapoisett, the town planner position Sue just mentioned, right? So instead, we're saying, hey, you know what? We budgeted $75,000 for a town planner. We advertised for it, couldn't find any. We actually went out, because I said we don't need a full-time planner, we need a part-time planner. As long as we got the part-time planner to actually work 19 and a half hours a week, you'd be amazed at how much productivity we get out of somebody, as long as you made sure their butt was in that office 19 and a half hours a week compared to what we had before, right? We did that to no prevail. We got hamburger flippers. We don't want hamburger flippers. We need somebody with some grant experience, right, to come in and get us grants and do things like that. We don't have it. So now Mr. Kelly and the Board of Selectmen are looking at talking with Mattapoisett. They have a shared interest. Maybe we do go up in the salary and we split the salary, so it's a 50-50 split, right?
But you're
That's what
talking
we're
about
doing.
Different ideas, we're thinking about it. They're doing it.
Fairhaven's got a letter into us now as well. They've seen what we were doing with Mattapoisett with just the planner's position. They have an appetite because they know where they're at with their budgets. They have an appetite. They sent us a letter. We're interested in talking with the Board of Selectmen over some regionalization, so maybe we have shared service with them as well, right? Maybe it's the Concom agent that we can't hire right now. They have one, we don't have one. We'll split that salary with you. Bing, we're all set. I mean, that's kind of where we're at in today's world of employment, right? Nobody, I don't care if you're a hot dog maker, or you're a garbage man, or you're a school teacher, or you're a business administration person right now. It's difficult to find anybody that wants to do anything. I have plenty of people in businesses, in the private sector. They tell me, you know what I do, Kev? I bring people in, and they're here for 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm waving them goodbye. And that's what I have to do, just to see if I can manage that person and get them to where I need to fill that position.
But Kevin, these changes you're talking about are a one-year fix, because then they become part of the budget, and then next year, right, everything gets adjusted. That helps us for that 1 year when we can start sharing costs. Then it's part of the budget, and then next year, you can't get an increase that way again.
But what I'm saying is the Board of Selectmen from our side is,
I would like equal time.
we're trimming everything that we can, Sue, right? From our perspective, to show people that we're thinking outside the box. I can't, it's a fool's game, so I save $1, somebody else spends
I'm just
$2.
the point being to what you were saying before. It's a fix for 1 year.
You
And
can't
it
go
helps
back
us
to that
1
well
year.
each
You
year.
can't go to that well again. That's the point.
I understand, but we've done everything and demonstrated from the Board of Selectmen
Yes.
side and the leadership side that we're doing everything we can to
And-
think outside of the box, because that's what we're forced
if we
to
go
do.
to
That's what real leaders
stabilization-
do. What I'm saying is I can't save 50 cents here and somebody else is gonna take my 50 cents and spend $1.50.
And my point
That's the
is-
problem, Sue.
I don't disagree with you. All I'm saying is that we go to that well once, you can't go to that well the next year.
Correct.
And if you go to stabilization, that has a very short shelf life. If we're looking to that to balance the budget. At most, at a $1.2 million deficit, that gets us 2 years, that's it.
You try to spend $2 million, so our average run rate, if you want to go back to that conversation, our average run rate in the total budget for the town of Acushnet, we average $1.25 million year over year, if you look at the last 4 years, okay? I always use 3 or 4 year trends. You look at what we spent over the last 3 or 4 years, our average run rate is $1.2 million, $1.25 million. That's our average run rate, right? If you went that route where he said, hey, let's just pretend it's 1.2. Let's say we go to stabilization and you get 800,000. Everybody at home
I
that's
didn't give a
watching.
figure.
I know you didn't give a figure, but if everybody at home's watching this and they're saying, well, if you average $1.2 million, Mr. Gasper, a year, and this is what my tax bill did on that $1.2 million over the last 4 years, can you folks imagine what's gonna happen when I take 800,000 to make your point, Sue, and stick that in the budget, and now we spend $2 million?
But I was talking about
The
a
more
one
you
year,
s-
1 year dip, if we had a dip.
the more you spend, the more you raise, right? So you can raise that pot of gold and you can spend it, but if you spend $2 million this year, that's what you're calculating for next year to raise by taxation.
Hang on, I want to...
No, hey, wait a minute.
Let's get that clear.
He's had,
He's the chair.
he's had a lot of time. So let me just,
John, excuse me.
why
have
are
some
you
questions.
shutting me
I'm
off
not
when you
shutting you
turn,
off. I have some specific
let him rave
questions. I have specific
for an hour?
questions. I have specific questions relative to the budget. I have some specific questions relative to the budget.
Okay,
We're running out of time.
right,
Okay.
why are you shutting me
I'm
off?
not shutting you off. You've had plenty of opportunity to speak tonight. And you can speak
Really,
again.
I've been trying to get your attention for the last 15, 20 minutes.
Well, I want to be specific and focused on the budget, okay?
Well, I want to give you a little history,
All right.
okay? 3
Go
years
ahead.
ago, I was sitting next to you saying the same things Sue has been saying, okay? Now I have to wear a different hat because I'm elected by the people to serve the needs of the children and the education of children. Okay. It was a very lonely road. It was only Sue and I were speaking at the town meeting saying we're gonna reach a collision point and so forth and so on. Okay?
I remember, I watched it. I wasn't there. I was away.
Okay. The selectmen were looking at us with their mouths open and very silent. At a critical point that we had in where we would be going in the budget. The town meeting is the legislative body of this community. They made a decision that they wanted to have quality education and make progress in the schools. That was their vote. And this is what I had to have to serve. I have to serve what the taxpayers of this community have voted to do. But I just want to raise the point about 3 years ago, and Sue and I was a very lonely road, and everybody,
Yes,
Just-
I brought this up.
okay, and I'd love to have Latter-day Saints, but the time has passed for that.
I want to move us along. Mr. Howcroft, thank you for your comment. I know it's getting late. I know you still have questions, so I want to make sure that you get your questions answered. So if we could just keep moving along, focus
Yes.
on the budget, please.
I wanted to know more about the two positions, the academic coaches. Like, when were they created, and what are their roles?
So the academic coaches support teachers, so teachers who need support on the new curriculum, on teaching strategies, and we've seen a lot of success with that.
So they're not teaching students?
Sometimes they are, they model, but overall it impacts our students.
So when were they added?
I don't know.
During COVID.
To be fair, Dr. Boucher, like, we had asked you for what your concerns were, we never received that, like, I would have had that with the year that they were added, I don't have it with me tonight, but we can get that.
I think it's 2020 or 2021.
Well, that's fine, I mean, that, when they were added is,
It was during COVID.
those positions are pretty well-paid positions, and, I mean, between the two positions with benefits, it's costing the town about $200,000.
Right, but we
Those
also
two
have
There's
positions.
two, just for perspective, there's two, one for each school. Typically, a school district of this size has 4. So, you know, again, we're being
conservative.
conservative with the
It's
coaches
just-
that we have.
Is that,
It was at least
I mean-
pre
And our scores are showing
2029.
improvements with the
Prior to
coaches, which we
2020.
can,
I just
we can
think
show
with
those
the,
scores.
with the teaching staff we have, which is definitely a veteran staff, seasoned teachers,
Seasoned teachers access the coaches.
I mean, I just, it seems like a luxury item to me to have
It's
that.
not a
And,
luxury
you know,
item. If you
in a
look at other
perfect,
school
you
districts,
know,
it's
look,
quite
every
comparable.
department in this town has wants and needs.
But it's
and
not a luxury item, please don't call it that.
It's not a luxury item.
No.
So
It's a
that,
necessity.
so academic coaches have been in the school system for for 20 years.
No, the
The
point was,
model has been around for quite a while. You know, I would say, you know, for teachers who are struggling, our first choice is not to terminate them or get rid of them. Our choice is to always support them and build their capacity, and that is one huge way that we do that. They provide professional development, they work with the students as well to model for
Don't
teachers.
you have mentors in the budget?
Only
that
new
don't-
teachers have mentors.
But that's done
I feel
by-
as a budget subcommittee member that we're sort of getting in the weeds here, and us as a school committee and as a budget subcommittee working with the superintendent, the business manager, the ATA, feel that these positions are needed. They're not wants, they're not luxury items. So that, you asked the question of, do you think that we need this? The answer is yes. So can we move on to the next question?
So our pillar, achieving academic excellence, it is because of our staffing pattern that we've been able to achieve what we have achieved, and that includes coaches.
Especially
Well,
during COVID.
Well, and, you know, unfortunately, in economic times like we're facing right now, a lot of times you have to do more with less, right? I mean, that's how private businesses have to do it all the time. You know, if a private business were to run like a municipality, and I've said this over and over again, I know Kevin has said it, they would probably go out of business if they were forced to run like a municipality. Because you can't just guarantee like raises to your employees. If your business isn't making a profit, you're not gonna give raises the next year. It's not gonna happen. I mean, you might end up laying off staff,
But
unfortunately.
we do have a profit here. We have our children getting smarter and more intelligent every
I'm talking
single year.
about-
And
I'm
it's
talking
not
about
like-
financial
Not a
profit.
profit.
Well,
I'm talking
again,
about- I'm
okay,
talking
if we're
about-
talking
We
about,
understand
if
that.
we're talking
No,
about a
Sarah, I'm
business
talking
model.
about dollars.
Right, I understand that, but again, you asked the question about whether or not it was a need or a want or a luxury, and the answer the answer is that it's a need, and we need it to support our students.
Well, and I know our fire, EMS, police, they all have a lot of wants as well, and they don't get.
They have needs or wants?
Needs.
They want things, but they can't get them, they can't get them all. Because
Again,
they can't afford it.
we have 1,000 children that need to be educated the proper way. And we don't want our parents and our taxpayers to go to other districts because our education is
I
subpar.
understand that, and I know the importance of having a good school system.
Okay.
But our responsibility is
I
to
hear
the
you.
entire town,
I
to all
hear
the residents in this town, not just parents that have kids in the school system.
Mike, I hear you, but
You
the
know, I
point
mean-
is you're getting in the weeds of how education works here, and that's our job
And it is,
here.
you're right, it's your job to figure out how that money
Exactly.
gets allocated,
Right.
1,000%.
And we're trying
And
to
we
figure out-
hear you of
and
what
we're
you
trying to
said
figure out how
about
it's
these
spent.
positions. We
No,
hear you.
and all we're saying here is the dollar amount is less.
I guess, but he's
than
getting
what
into
we're-
specifics.
And so we don't have to get into
Right.
specifics. And all we're saying here is the dollar amount that we have to allocate is less. Because we do have to pay insurance,
Right, we understand.
utilities, and that's all we're saying.
We
So we
understand.
need, however it's cut, we gotta bring it down.
I hear you.
Because at the end of the day, if we're talking about stabilization, I have a hard issue with that
Understood.
because of all the things we've just talked about.
Understood.
Because when our pay comes down or utility costs go up, we're not hitting savings for that, we're cutting other things. Maybe we're having heat at 63 instead of 68 in the house. Those are the types of things. So we're simply looking at it like, if this was my home, how would I do this? Okay? And gutting stabilization gives me a whole lot of heartburn, not just because it's not there for us. You keep on saying, Sarah, is this emergency? Is it
Well,
raining?
at the same time, Sue, you're putting your heat down to 65. You're talking about us getting rid of one of our kids because we can't afford it. And that's what you're talking about when it comes to removing staff. So we're not going to get rid of a staff. We're not going to get rid of one of our children because our income came down 35. We're going to do everything we can to try to support it. And that's why we're talking outside the box.
It's up to you to decide
Yes.
how it goes.
Exactly.
All we're saying is that dollar amount
I hear you.
is low.
At the end of the
What's the
day, you
next
say
question?
everything that's in your budget is a need.
Pete, hold on.
We're saying we can't fund all of the needs, so you have to find out what's the most
And
critical
that's
need.
for us to decide as a committee. So any other questions?
Dr. Bailey,
Okay. So we have been really trying to think out of the box. We know this is an issue after all of our meetings. We've talked about, you know, at our next school committee meeting, we have on our agenda to look into a possible regionalization study. We're looking into our tuition contracts. We know that's not a fix for this year or even next year.
Realistic, we said it was 3 years, right,
Yes.
Dr.
3
Bailey?
to 5
3 to 5
years.
years.
5 years probably for regionalization.
And we're starting now.
In order
We
for,
have to wait out our tuition contracts first.
yeah, correct.
And
That's
So our
2
tuition
years.
contracts have 1 and 2 more years respectively, right? So we know that this is not an immediate fix, so we're thinking long-term. We don't want to be here every year having the same conversation, okay? We know this is an issue.
Getting too old for this.
Yeah, I
Dr.
know, me
Bailey.
too.
Getting too old.
Me too. So, you know, ultimately, I want to make sure you have all your questions answered, and if you do, I'd like to get some clarification on where you would like us to be, and then I'm going to go back to the school committee, because we could be here all night
Yeah.
going back and forth,
So-
right?
And
I'm-
that, very fair question.
I
think
would
we
like
need-
to know, what is the number exactly? And then it's up to the school committee to
How
decide,
to do it.
yeah. Does that make sense?
yes, Mr.
But
Mr.
before
Kelly,
you do that,
could
you
give
have
us
all
some
your
insight on
questions
that?
answered.
That's a tough question for him to answer tonight, for the simple fact that the Board of Selectmen haven't seen any of the budgets, right? We're not done with certain individuals with their budgets, okay? So if Mr. Kelly to try to whip out a
All right,
number
so if he
tonight,
can't do that tonight,
that
we
would
can
be,
get back to you.
I wouldn't
Okay,
advise
fair
it.
You guys aren't voting on your budget until when?
I
May.
would,
Next month, May.
Okay,
Okay.
so we got plenty of time between now and then to work on that.
I've got one caveat. May 3rd, we need to go into the process of printing and posting the warrant for June 3rd. So things have to be done right around that time. Totally
So-
done.
Okay, which means we
We're
have
on
to
pace
vote
for
on it.
May 7th for our school committee to adopt the budget, to leave it open as long as we can, or we have to call a special meeting.
okay,
We'll call
so
a special meeting.
May 3rd, May 7th, May 3rd, May 3rd.
We'll call a special
If we
meeting.
need to,
I was just
Patrick,
pointing
if
it out.
we need to
I
go
was
to
just pointing it
print,
out.
if we need to go to print, Mr. Kelly, we need to go to print.
Understood, I just was painting the picture.
We would ask that
Yeah.
the school committee make some accommodation and
Yeah.
kick
But wait,
yourself
but how
back.
early does it need to be? Because we then need to vote it, right?
But we need to know the number.
So
Well, we need to get the number,
You
yes.
two boards need to figure that out. I need to
So it
walk
can't be May
into the
3rd
printer
because we
May
still need to
3rd.
do something with
It needs to be
it.
ready.
And when will the board?
So tomorrow,
When will the
right?
board of selectmen see budgets?
Day after.
I'm gonna start seeing budgets very shortly. I mean, some of the budgets we can like zip right through, right, because they're small. Like, we have some tiny budgets. I'm not gonna play games with those. I'm not gonna strip, animal control officers and say, oh, look, you have $500 extra. I'm going after that. We'll bang out all the little ones. FinCom can say, okay, we got those out of the way, and we got really, fire EMS, police, DPW.
Yeah, no, I understand.
The
I
bigger
just
budgets.
wanna
Old
know how much
Colony,
time
I
we
mean,
have
I want to
when we get
revisit
through
Old
your
Colony
budgets
too,
to know
right?
the bottom
So
line.
there's things that we need to revisit and have another discussion.
I understand that, but before then, he's gonna come down and figure out that our deficit is X instead of Y, so then they can pass the knowledge on to us to say,
If
we need
the
to get
House
to this.
comes out with their figures, because you're not gonna get
Which could
this,
be late April,
but you're
and we're
not
up
gonna
against May
get that.
3rd.
But if we're lucky, if the House,
Exactly.
I mean, I was sitting in those chairs And there are many years we went till August or September before we voted on a budget.
So Patrick,
And I was a
May
lobbyist
3rd is a
in a
Friday,
way, you know that.
which means our last meeting would be May 1st.
Right, but we can't have it last minute that close because
Right, somebody-
we
If we're gonna try to
we have
close
to
the
post
gap,
the
you
meeting
know, we
48
need to
hours
have time.
before the meeting is posted. So we would need some,
So
Advance
realistically,
notice.
you're in.
I don't, I mean, if we're waiting to see, if this, all it is holdup is waiting, going back to the earlier conversation of what is the state legislative body gonna do with chapter 70, going from a 0.5% increase to whatever the percentage increase. I just told you what the 4-year run rate's been, and the increase in chapter 70 is $80,000 a year. Right now at the 0.5, it's $35,000. So even if that is, I told you, it's $50,000. You know, maybe they come up with a little bit more and you get 100 grand versus the 80 grand, so you're talking 70,000 bucks.
We don't know.
No, but seeing all the budgets, wouldn't you agree that it's easier to cut $500,000 over 2 years instead of all at once and still be able to manage your services?
What's that, Pat? I didn't get what you just said.
If the cut ends up being $500,000, and that's, again, this is hypothetical, and you want us to take that cut right now, versus if we wait and find out that cut only needs to be 250 now with the intentions that it's gonna come down another 250 later, we're gonna be able to audible a little bit better, taking it in
Patrick,
pieces than all
You're
at
talking to
once.
Kevin, okay? The reality of it is wherever you said your budget is, 650 right now, right? You're talking to Kevin. I would never expect the school department to come in at 150. That would be like an historical event. I'd buy everybody a bottle of Tito's and we'd all sit here and have a grand old time. If that happened, I would praise you if you came in at 150.
We're all going to Rivers anyway.
That-
You know that's not
That
happening.
contests with what's been said all
We
night.
know it's not happening though, Patrick. That's the point I'm trying to make to everybody, and including the people that are at home. Like, you know, you have to sit back and look at it, and I think you've demonstrated that the school department is up, 6% above net school spending. That's great. You guys have come down, right? It's still, as Mr. Benoit said, $1 million, right? We get it. I just don't understand how the rest of us, all the FinCom folks and the Board of Selectmen are gonna wrap their arms around certain other people coming and getting this big pie of money, and we're gonna look at our school system and say, no pie for you. I don't know if I could ever do that, right? I do think that there needs to be some more trimming, right? 650s, we know that we can't have 650, right? I agree with you that, what's that magic number? We're gonna try to figure that out, right? I'm constantly looking at the revenue recap sheet with Mr. Kelly, trying to figure things out. We talked about it in a meeting that we've had, Patrick. The revenues they're moving targets. A lot of our revenues are variable to revenue lines, right? And we don't want to breach a certain percentage of using that revenue line, because then you become extremely dangerous, right? Some of them were at that level, 75, 80% of revenue. You're looking at, that's a variable, you're getting to a dangerous level where you don't want to exceed that level, right? So we're going to look at things, we're constantly updating numbers. If state aid came in with another 50 or 75, woo-wee, we're talking $650,000. I think that I think we just need to everybody needs to look at their budgets all over again and say, what can we actually do, knowing what we have, and the absolute bottom line numbers, what we would look for, and we'll figure it out from there.
I want to say one more thing.
We can manage.
The bottom line is we don't want to resort to using any funds from stabilization. We don't want to resort to overrides to fund the operational budget. It's not right, and we should not be doing that to our residents. They pay enough in taxes. Property taxes have gone up quite a bit over the last couple of years. Homeowners insurance has skyrocketed for people. Energy cost, it's out of control. We can't put any more on the backs of our residents. That's all the residents in this town. Not just parents that have kids in the school system. And I get it. I was a parent. My son went to these schools. I went to these schools. So and I think education is extremely important. But how much is the cost? It's gotten out of control, not just for education, but for everything, right? And this is a difficult job. I mean, being on this committee, being on your committee, Board of Selectmen, I would not want to be any one of these gentlemen. These guys work so hard. They spend so much time. It's more than people know. So people that are watching out there, before you criticize our Board of Selectmen, you have no idea how much effort and time and care and passion they put into this town. I mean, I love this town. I grew up in this town. I live here. I've lived here since 2005. I bought, you know, a great home in a neighborhood that I grew up in. I still live next to my parents are right down the street from me. I love it. You know, I don't want to see other people have to lose their homes because they can't afford to live here. I mean, it's getting tough. I mean, I hate to see another housing crisis, right? Where you have foreclosures. I mean, something's got to change. And hopefully things will get better at the federal level because everything trickles down, right? When you have good economic policies at the federal level, it helps the state, and that helps the local levels. Right now, we're all hurting because of failed economic policies at the top. And that's no fault of our own here. You know, we're all in the same boat. We're all trying to run a household and live as comfortable as we can, you know, take a vacation and enjoy life, right? But it's gotten harder. I don't think anybody would disagree with me on that.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Honest question. So you mentioned no stabilization, no overrides. At the same point, you know, best practice is 80, 70% revenues, right, Kevin? Our run rate he alluded to is $1 million, $1.2 million a year. Where's the comfort level for that number to come down? So that we're not closing out $1 million to free cash that could have gone towards a deficit. And is that built into this deficit number right now? Are we at a $1.2 million deficit with the intentions to close out $1 million like we normally do? In my understanding, it is, correct? So where can we get that number to?
I was going to say, I can just speak over the last 3 years, and especially since Mr. Kelly came on board, where our run rate may be 1 to 1.2 per year. It would be a lot more if we weren't making the cuts and cutting and trimming the fat, like our selectman said.
It'd be a lot less.
Right?
Right.
No, our deficit would be...
No, the run rate is $1 million. We're closing out $1 million to free cash annually.
Part of it is because we're not providing the services.
Understood. So
we're not filling positions.
But we talked about no stabilization, no overrides. So where's the comfort level with that run rate number to come down from $1 million?
I don't think you're going to see free cash anywhere near that in the future.
Do you have a forecast for the free cash in FY25 as of the budget?
I could definitely get it to you. I've been playing around with the numbers, Patrick. I mean, I'd be more than happy to sit down with you. I do this crap every day. I'm staring at numbers and studying numbers and looking at percentages constantly. So I have an actual...
No, I trust you understand.
I have a breakdown. I have a breakdown at home that I can bring into you and show you what's been going on and the trends, right, that are going on. And I think the Board of Selectmen are going to have that conversation with, you know, things like excise tax, right? So we talked about that a little bit, right? You look at a trend, if the trend's going down, you want to just stay where you're at and maintain that level. But if your trend in revenue's gone up, we were talking about excise tax, then maybe you could steal a little bit more money from Peter to pay Paul, right? And use that for budgetary reasons, which would then in return reduce free cash the following year because now you're using a little bit more of that revenue line. It's all on the table this year, right? Mr. Kelly and I are constantly at each other's throat.
I just want to understand.
We're constantly, I mean, I don't know how much hair I pulled out of his head and he's pulled out of my head, but we're constantly disputing the recap sheet, right, where all the revenue is, right? But, you know, let's...
1/2 of free cash in the last 2 years are one-time fixes. Like, we have $400,000 in uncollected taxes.
Correct.
We collected
we don't need to get into the weeds. I
What
wanted
do
to
we think for this
understand, we
year?
threw
Do we
out the
have
run
any
rate
idea?
is generally around $1 million.
Yeah.
I want to understand if that was
But I'm
built into the
saying
deficit.
you're not going to get a number of those.
Okay.
I think it's going to be substantially less.
So moving forward, we don't expect it to be anywhere near $1 million, is what
No.
we're saying, even with our cuts.
Well, because part of the $1 million is coming through because we collected some uncollected previously.
No, I
uncollected bills in the
understand, but
future.
it's not just last year.
But that's the thing, and it's these positions that we haven't been able to fill. For the same reason, we're gonna have to fill those positions, and that's not gonna hit the bottom line. But you guys know, you've seen it. How many times do we get emails, people are leaving, like town accountant left. People are constantly leaving, and so that's how it ends up in free cash. cash, Patrick, right? Like, and so that's how it ends up in free
And
cash,
you-
and that's where it goes to stable,
Yeah,
like,
yes and no, because again, I mean, I don't want to put Mr. Gasper on the spot, but he alluded to the fact that you, best practice, you don't forecast revenues at 100% to build your budget. You forecast them at 80, 70, so that you have some leftover by the end of the year to close out, or if an emergency happens, you don't end up in a deficit.
But
Well,
the 70
to
or
be
80
fair, I called it a revenue variable,
Sure.
right? So like license and permits, I talked to you about that as well, right? If you're doing 200,000, right now, new growth's going down, so you know your license and permit revenue line item's gonna plummet down, because if you ain't got new growth on this side, the only way you get new growth is if you're doing license and permits. So one's telling me we're in trouble next year with that line, that revenue line item. When right now, we're budgeting, I think, 76% of license and permits. Off the top of my head, I think that's where we're at, right? And that's a massive variable, like that thing fluctuates 30, 40%. So again, we're already, with the 3-year trend line, we're using 76% of that revenue line. There's that variable that's in there, right? We went without a building commissioner for a short duration of time, and I can tell you this right now, I drive around this town constantly, okay? Constantly driving around this town with my co-pilot Felix, okay? Not you, Bob, right? And I seen things when we didn't have a building inspector, I seen construction taking place that would have required a permit fee, but we weren't collecting it in because we didn't have a building inspector in place for somebody to go and pull a permit.
And local receipts are at the most 10% of our total revenue.
No, but I guess my point is, we're
Mr.
not,
Chairman, point of
as
order.
a town, right, you're not budgeting to break even.
I'm going to make a motion
Correct?
to
Because that would be
adjourn.
dangerous.
Has everybody said their piece tonight so far?
Second.
Motion been made and seconded.
Do we have a? Right. So we each have to close out our own.
I'd like to just take an opportunity, Mr. Chairman, to thank all our finance committee members, our school committee, my colleagues, the board of selectmen, Mr. Kelly. Look, this is part of the process, right? We might not like it, but this is the process that we always have to go through, right? And that you're responsible. I think Miss Bailey, you made a comment. You're responsible for 1,000 students. The board of selectmen are responsible for 10,300 individuals in the town of Acushnet, right? We're extremely passionate about children. Mr. Hinckley's got 2 young daughters. I have a son that's gone through the school system. I've gone through the school system. Make no mistake about it. I don't think there's anyone inside of this room that doesn't want the best for all of our children, right? Regardless if it's my child or somebody else's child, we all want the best for our children. That's absolutely at the forefront of our agenda, is the best for our students. But there's gotta be a level of a price that there's a stopgap, right? We can't just give, I wish I hit that mega millions at $800 million and I could just come to the school and say, here's $10 million, have a nice day, I solved your problems for the next decade. I wish I could do that.
Cream is down.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman, a motion was made and seconded.
All right, so we had a.
We have to
I'll make a
close out
motion.
each
We each have to close out our own meeting, so, all right, so I'll take,
I'll make a
Finance
motion
committee.
to adjourn the finance committee meeting.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, finance committee is adjourned.
Motion to adjourn, Board of Selectmen. I'm sorry.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye. You're doing a hell of a job.
And I think we already had a motion on the table, Mr. Arrow. Do I have a second to adjourn our meeting?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.